my computer. Can
Yeah.
I? Yeah. Okay, I'll open it. I haven't done that before.
Good morning, everybody. I see we have Robert Joyce, one of our keynotes this morning, is here.
Hello.
Good morning, Robert.
Hi, Robert.
Good morning, Robert.
Robert, where are you joining us from this morning?
Sunny Clifton.
Oh, very nice.
And I'm in sunny Oughterard, Robert.
A beautiful town. I lived there for many years.
Oh, did you? Yeah.
I did, yeah.
I think I met you then before.
Yeah, I used to live down the station road.
Yeah, I do know you. Hi, Dennis.
Hi everyone, how you doing?
Hi, Dennis.
Hi, Dennis. Good morning.
Good to see you all.
So for those joining us now, Dennis is a long-standing member of the primary care PPI group. Delighted to have him here. And I see Patrick Tarr is joining. Good morning, Patrick. So yeah, we've got lots of people joining, 38 at the moment. And yeah, everyone, we will be getting started at 10, but we have just a few minutes now just to...
And if people want to tune in on YouTube, do they just Google it? Because somebody texted there this morning.
So when I sent out the Zoom link, Carmel, I included the YouTube streaming link as well on that email.
Of course, yeah. But I
and it's pinned on our Twitter account. So it's the very first tweet. If they want to go in and just click on that YouTube, they will go straight into the streaming.
Thanks, Breda.
That's all.
There's just so much technology. Oh, Lord.
Don't worry, Carmel. We've excellent technical backup this morning. Dave and Martha and Breda and Idel will all be kind of looking after us. So we'll be okay.
Oh, I see it now here, yeah. Okay.
So welcome also, Ruth. We can see you there. Good morning.
Morning, everybody. Delighted to be here. So excited for this conference. And hello, Robert. Robert very kindly gave an excellent lecture to the occupational therapy and speech and language therapy third-year students recently. They're still talking about it, Robert. So yeah, it's lovely to see you this morning and everybody else. Yeah.
Delighted to be here.
Thanks, Robert. I also see Carl de Fontenay. Carl, you'll be one of our speakers later this morning. Good morning and thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for that I can participate in this.
Delighted to have you. You're joining us from Denmark, I believe.
That's right.
Yes.
From the Baltic Sea, from the island of Bornholm.
Okay, fantastic. Great to have you here.
Between Sweden and Poland.
Wow.
Just had a very valid question in saying in our email where we sent out the Zoom link, we asked participants not to turn on their camera or their microphone, but we're just having a pre-conference chat here, so please do feel free to turn on your camera and your microphone and chat away before we kick off at 10. But once we do kick off, we'll be asking you to turn them off again just for internet connection reasons. But thanks, everyone.
Morning, Edel Tierney.
Hi, Adele.
Morning, and Wendy is joining us. Good morning, Wendy, one of our PPI contributors from the organizing committee and chair on a session later this morning.
Good morning, everybody. Great to see everybody.
Morning, Wendy.
Morning, Wendy.
So I'm seeing some other speakers coming in as well. So we have Dr. Nana Hempler joining us from Denmark, I believe. Good morning, Nana.
Yes, I'm also joining from Denmark as well as Carl, but north of Copenhagen. So not on the island, but north of Copenhagen. Looking forward to this conference. And hi, Adele.
Great.
And Carl.
Hi, Nana.
Great. Thanks for joining us. And I see Nicolette Warner, who will be talking this afternoon, just before in the final session. Good morning, Nicolette.
Morning. I'm sitting in Galway, so close to PPI itself.
Great. And here we have Andrew. Andrew, you're on mute.
Yeah, good morning all. Andrew Murphy here. So very welcome and good luck, Carmel. You know, Obama-like words we're hoping for.
Yeah, I'm all set to go. Jumping at the bit here.
I will admit to Andrew that we haven't seen what Carmel's going to say, so we're waiting with bated breath.
Oh no, Andrew, I'm very well behaved as usual. I've matured over the years, you'll be happy to hear. Oh, God.
Well, we always have the mute button, Carmel, that's okay.
Oh, Patrick, you're cute, yeah. How many people altogether do you think will join us?
So we have 59, 60 at the moment. Breda, how many have registered?
In excess of 300, our capacity is 300. But yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we could break a record this year and have our greatest number attending.
Yeah, and the great thing is that people can see afterwards, can still tune in.
Yeah. The recordings have always been very popular.
Yeah.
Yeah, for people who can't access it. But since we have gone virtual, we've increased our numbers threefold. We would generally have about 120 if it was held here on campus.
Yeah.
But last year we had in excess of 400 registered.
Fantastic.
There's a lot of interest.
I was just on a student organized Zoom yesterday that was badly, for want of a better phrase, infiltrated by COVID doubters and quite abusive online during it. So, you know, if we have to remove people, we'll have to do that. It was the first time I had experienced it, and it really was quite, for want of a better phrase, shocking on it. So, yeah, it's a strange world out there.
Was it one person or multiple people?
Multiple people, and they were able to hijack the PowerPoint and write into the PowerPoint.
Oh.
And were, you know, quite abusive language on it, and very, yeah, just, and again, the students were great. They just kept going, kept persevering. Really impressive to see them in action. But yeah, the first time I've been bombed.
Yeah, we've been lucky so far. We haven't had any problems with any event we've done online.
Wow.
So just for those who are joining us in the last few minutes, we will be starting at 10. So this is just an opportunity to say hi and get settled in with the technology.
Hi, Ciara. Ciara's joining us from Australia, Patrick. So I'm just putting her there at the bottom of the screen.
Hi, Ruth. How are you?
What time is it with you, Ciara?
It's actually not too bad. It's just 7 o'clock.
Okay, 7 p.m.
Yeah, so it's actually not too late. It's not 1 o'clock in the morning or anything like that.
Lovely.
Only dinner time. It's lovely to see you, Ruth.
I think we saw you and maybe your colleagues in Australia tweeting about the conference over the last 24 hours. So it's been amazing to see this conference in Galway, obviously online, but being tweeted on the other side of the world.
There's been a lot of interest in it actually, because I think Ireland are quite well known for their patient and public involvement work. So I've been trying to spread the word over here in Australia about it.
Thank you. So just 2 minutes to go, I think. 1 minute. So we will be going live in a moment. I will be asking everybody when we go live just to turn off their cameras and their microphones just during the presentations themselves. And there will be opportunities throughout the day to turn on your cameras again and your microphones to interact in the Q&A sessions.
How do you do that?
So Martha, actually, I might leave you do the technical instructions. You're better at this than I am.
Oh, I see. Start video on mute. I've got it. Yeah.
Great.
Brilliant.
If anybody's stuck, we
Thanks.
can also unmute you from this end. So don't worry. Or we can mute and unmute.
Yeah.
Martha, do I go into the break and then say you're going to take over after, or will you come on before that?
Yeah, you can bring us into the break, Carmel. That's brilliant. Then I'll be back in.
Okay, so we're just coming up to 10 o'clock. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to hand over now to Carmel Gagan, who's going to be opening the conference.
Thank you, Patrick. Good morning and welcome everyone to the 6th National Public and Patient Involvement in Research Conference, coming to you from a sunny Galway here in the west of Ireland. And our theme is creating the new normal in research. So to give you a little bit of information about myself, my name is Carmel Gagan, and I'm delighted to be officially launching today. I've been involved in public patient involvement since caring for my mom, who had a very late diagnosis of vascular dementia. And I was her primary carer for her last 3 years until end of life. And this experience, Mom passed away in 2014. And during this experience, I had started to get involved in advocacy on their behalf of her and getting involved in research. So I continued on this path for the vulnerable voice. And during my work then, this led me to meet and now have the privilege of, in the position of supporting Helen Rochford Brennan in her amazing work advocating for the voice of the person with dementia to be involved and respected. So throughout this experience, and in particular our involvement with the European Working Group of People with Dementia, I've been empowered and given opportunities that have changed my life and my thinking. So life experience is how we all grow and develop. I've learned the importance and the value of the public patient voice, which I and many people now like to call it, and the importance of research in order to change our quality of life going forward. But for far too long, the patient person has been excluded. And this has changed in recent years, I suppose, mainly due to our voice being a fundamental part of funder requirements for pharmaceutical and other research. So it's great to see how we've all embraced this new thinking, and it's really due to the proven benefits of having the public patient voice at the table. And of course, it makes perfect sense to have the real experts, the lived experience, those living with the diagnosis or those experiencing it firsthand, to be all involved in the different aspects of research, being at the table from the beginning, having input and an equal voice. So I feel perhaps some researchers are anxious, maybe, and not confident when being faced with having to engage with us. But I'd like to take this opportunity to let you know that we're not difficult, and we're actually very eager and happy to support you. We want to get the best possible opportunities for you and your research ideas. And sometimes I wonder if our voice is not valued like it should be, because in most cases, we're the only ones at the table not receiving a payment. And it's important that training and various forms of support, where required, is factored in. We have to gain knowledge, be informed and respected in order to work in real partnership. We want to set the questions, think about the issues that merit questioning, and we want to move from research participants to being research instigators. We have the right to be involved in governance and management of research projects. I've been involved in many great research projects, not just at a national level, but partnering with our international counterparts and being involved in making positive changes. I'm completely in favour of sharing and collaborating on projects, and I'm very conscious of funding shortages. And so not duplicating research is vital. And I'd really welcome a database of all research undertaken, and I think it'd be a fantastic tool internationally. Also, keeping us updated on the progress of the research and the dissemination of research projects is essential. So we are informed and that the research is not left gathering dust on shelves. We must be penny wise and work on a value-based healthcare model that we can be proud of. Now, we have an exciting morning ahead with a wide range of speakers, and this year again, it's a virtual conference, so I welcome you all who have logged in today and those who tune in later to the recorded sessions. And it's wonderful how the patient person has adjusted to this virtual world. Being virtual, as we see, has given a much broader audience. But the face-to-face for me is still my favourite. The opportunity to meet people in person and the networking is always the perfect experience. And of course, we all need human contact. And in the words of John F. Kennedy, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. So on that note, I have now the great pleasure of introducing our first guest speaker, Robert Joyce, who comes here from the west of Ireland like myself. And Robert's an embedded patient researcher, and over the last 4 years has become a patient advocate. And he's doing amazing work. He's been involved as part-time researcher assistant on the COV-MS, which is the Cognitive Occupation-Based Program for people with multiple sclerosis. Amazing work, and we look forward to hearing his presentation, which will be on, it's pre-recorded, so we'll go into that and then we'll take questions. Robert is here with us live this morning. Thank you.
About 17 years ago, I started a new medication for treating my multiple sclerosis. It was an off-label prescription, and this drug was hopefully going to resolve the fact that on my previous medication, I was getting a relapse every 3 months or so, and each relapse was a little bit worse. Once I started this medicine, after about 6 weeks, my symptoms all disappeared. It was phenomenal. It was like a new life. And I wanted to share this with so many people that they could possibly have the same experience that I had. To do this, I shared my story through the MS Society. There was an article in a newspaper, and I also had the privilege of meeting then Minister for Health, Mary Harney. And I presented her the situation that this drug actually almost was like a cure for my multiple sclerosis. The great thing about this medicine was it was significantly cheaper than the medicine that I had been taking before, which was costing about 1,200 euros a month. And this drug only costs about 10 euros a month to manufacture. That would have been a huge saving. So I thought absolutely the Minister for Health would be very interested in this, just considering the cost savings that could be made if a trial was done on this medicine. Full of enthusiasm and vigor, I went to speak to her and presented my case. It fell on deaf ears. Nothing happened. I followed up, nothing, zero. It was really disappointing. And I could not understand how such a wonderful opportunity for people with MS could be ignored. Nothing happened. And as I realize now, given the hindsight of 17 years, there was a problem with my presentation. I did something wrong. I did not know about the medicine's process, how the new treatments are developed, how they are studied, researched, and eventually come to market. I was in a position of ignorance, and as a result, I was not able to achieve my goal, which was a pity. Now, I left it. I didn't do anything for many years. And then about 7 years ago, I was in a car accident, and my MS symptoms, which had disappeared as a result of this drug, came back again. It was not good. And I also had chronic headaches as a result of this accident, and I still have them today. They haven't changed. They haven't disappeared. So in 2017, I was kind of bereft. I had to stop working. My MS didn't allow me to do physical work because of mobility problems, and my headache wouldn't allow me to do stuff that involved concentration. My life had reduced into what I called 30-minute blocks. And this inspired me to start a blog, which I called A 30-Minute Life, because I have to live my life in these small half-hour segments. I cannot do anything longer than that without coming with a cost of more pain, lost mobility, and fatigue. My blog was great. It allowed me to share my life, my experience, what I had learned, and there was a community out there that was listening. They wanted to hear what I was doing, how my MS was affecting me, how pain and fatigue would curtail my life. But I had found a way of sharing my experience, and this is what the blog gave me. My blog then inspired me to do more with the MS Society. So I joined the MS and Me blogger group, which is a blog that the MS Society is running. And I also was a subscriber of their research newsletter, which I read every month. In one of these newsletters, I saw an ad for a new post of a research assistant on a trial in the university, the COB MS trial. And this is a feasibility study on a cognitive therapy for treating people with multiple sclerosis. The thought that I could be involved in research was something kind of novel to me. And there was two aspects to this recruitment. One is they wanted an assistant researcher who had experience of MS, either as a carer or a patient themselves, or to be on their advisory panel, both of which I was interested in. And I declared that when I applied for the job. Any way that I could help, any way that I could do my bit for my community. I was fortunate to get the role of the assistant researcher, and now that was started in July 2019. I don't call myself an assistant researcher anymore. I call myself an embedded patient researcher, which the name was coined by my colleague, Dr. Chris Dwyer, on the trial. This role is extremely interesting. I am part of the team. The COB MS trial has a significant amount of patient involvement in how it was formulated, how it's operated, and hopefully in the dissemination of the results of the trial when they are completed. The MS Society was involved at the very beginning in putting together the grant application for the trial and was involved in the interview process of me and the other people with MS who are on the patient advisory panel. Then every meeting that was conducted of the trial, I was there. I got to hear on a weekly basis what was happening, where the trial was going, and what obstacles or achievements we had made. Along the way, I experienced one or two things which I think are of note. The first one is one day a participant manual was shown to the group. It looked great. It had a wonderful cover on it. It was well made as a booklet. But I was able to say to my colleagues, this booklet is no good for people with MS. The thing is, they never felt that booklet with hands that have MS. So there's a number of issues that I have. I have pins and needles in my fingertips. The sensation is poor. Sometimes my dexterity is not as great as it could be. And I know I'm not the worst person with MS. You have people who have tremors, which makes it difficult to hold a page. And I said to them, really, this booklet needs to be completely redesigned. We had a healthy and robust discussion at that meeting, discussing all the ins and outs of what we should and shouldn't do. And we came to a consensus at the end. And this is what I love. We actually worked as a team to develop this booklet. Once we had come up with some type of solution, then we brought it to the patient advisory panel, and they added some extra bits onto what I had already suggested. Now we had a booklet that was really suitable for the participants. Now, what effect will this have on the trial that we're conducting? The main thing is it's actually subtle. The patients or the participants in the trial will not know that it was designed specifically for them. It will just feel inherently correct. And this is what I love. This will make their experience of being part of this trial a little bit better. Another incident that we had is recruitment, and this is the bugbear of so much research, is how to recruit enough participants. Now, we had been doing pretty well. We had recruited roughly half our participants in a short order of time, but we had only recruited half. And I was at one meeting and we were discussing this and about things that we could do to increase the number of participants. I suggested that we do some stuff on the radio or maybe newspapers. And Dr. Sinead Hines, who is the principal investigator on the trial, said, sure, go ahead, try it, see what you can do. And I immediately left that meeting, walked down to the Connacht Tribune's offices and asked them if they would do an interview about me and about our trial. They did. They actually said yes. And an article was in the City Tribune and in the Connacht Tribune. And from this, I decided that maybe we should do a bit more. I was interviewed on various radio stations, local and national, on national newspapers and on local newspapers. As a result, we recruited our full cohort of participants that we needed. This was a success. And I think if you look back on it, one of the issues that is there about patient involvement in research is a box ticking exercise. Many trials include participants, but only at a peripheral level, or once something has been designed and then the participants or the people with the illness are asked, what do you think of this? Do you think it's suitable? And it's very hard to change. And if you do change it, it is costly and it takes extra time and effort. And I can imagine as a researcher, you're looking at those patients saying, God, look at this, it's just creating more trouble. It's making my job harder. However, in our trial, because the patient is involved all the time in a true collaborative sense, it actually saves us time, it saves us effort, and it saves us cost, because we don't do something that isn't appropriate. And I think this is what makes patient involvement at an early stage and throughout the process so successful. Now, there is an aspect of this that we need to really look at, because there is a suitable person to be there on a weekly basis, but also you need the different types of illness represented by different people. And that's where the patient advisory panel comes in. So there's a role for everyone at every stage of their illness. You can contribute a little bit, or you can contribute a lot. It depends on your capacity, on the time that you have available, and the resources that you have. Now, what have I done in the last while to improve my ability to work in research? One area that I was lacking, which I told you about when I talked about Mary Harn earlier, was my knowledge of the medicines development system. And a colleague of mine on the MSME blog, Joan Jordan, had done a course with EUPATI, which is a European organization that teaches patients on the medicines process from the very beginning all the way to post-marketing or post-marketing authorization testing. I have now completed these studies and I am a patient expert now, trained by EUPATI. And this knowledge has really strengthened me. It has made me a better patient advocate, and that's really what I want to do. So how, as a patient, can I be involved? What are the different areas of research or advocacy that I can be involved in? Well, I see there's three distinct areas. The first is regular research, which I'm doing in the university. The second is community work. And this is trying to be the voice of your community, sharing your knowledge. And this is what my blog was doing for me and what the MS and Me blog on the MS Society's website is doing. I am also contributing in this in a way. I'm working with the MS Society producing a webinar series on how to manage progressive MS and how to become more resilient in the face of an illness that makes you gradually get worse. What can you do? And the MS Society has supported me in creating this webinar series. And it's fantastic. I get to speak to very knowledgeable people, doctors and researchers who have specific knowledge in different areas. And this is shared with the community. Another thing is policy and regulatory matters. So how does the state manage research? How does the state incorporate the patient or the public in the work that they do? My goal was to see if there are extra things that I can contribute to help ensure that patients are involved in research at all stages. So I'm doing work with the HSE, which is extremely interesting because we're working on the new research and development policy of the HSE. Where is it going to go? How should it be done? What is the consent policy like? How does it manage information? And this is really interesting for me because it is not going to affect me as an individual in the short term, but it will impact my community and the wider community in a very significant way. To be part of that is fantastic. To know that my voice is a contribution to how research is going to be conducted in the future. I'm also doing work with pharmaceutical organizations to help improve the quality of their work. And for example, with Roche, I am doing some work on an app that they have developed to help make appointments for people within the HSE. Now, this is still a development project, but Roche has included patients from the very, very beginning in the idea generation stage. And that's very powerful because as the product is being designed, it is being designed appropriate to the patient. My lived experience of using the HSE services, I know what the problems are. I've experienced them on a daily basis almost. And to be able to share that experience with them means that the product that is developed is far more appropriate. And it won't be developed in an incorrect way. It'll be designed suitable for our needs. I think that's incredibly powerful. And many patients can get involved in this. And it would be nice to see people from all different walks of life. We need true diversity and inclusivity because traditionally medicines have been tested on white males like myself, and that's really not appropriate. We need to have more women involved in research. We need to have people from different ethnic communities with different needs and motivators for getting involved in research or getting therapy. I think one of the things that is a thread through most of the work that I have done is the power of the patient's story. The experience that I have to be able to articulate it to other people, people who are researchers, academics, people who have had a lot of training, but their training has been in front of a page. They haven't actually experienced what it's like to have an illness and the needs and desires that we have. Sometimes it is pain, but other times we can have depression, fatigue, we can feel this deflation that is caused by our illness. It has robbed us of something. And sometimes those medicines that we get are actually making us feel worse because of the side effects of them. Maybe they're not appropriate for what we need because of the extra burden. The focus has to be on improving the quality of life of the patient. But we did experience the challenges, and I certainly experienced challenges being a patient advocate. Things like parking spaces, toilets, sound, lights within the university, distances. I had huge issues with these. And that was a difficulty when I started the job, but these have been resolved in one sense by the university, but also COVID has changed things dramatically. I now work from home all the time. And you can see here, this is my cave, this is my home where I get to touch the world from Clifton in Connemara. It's a wonderful thing that now, using the power of the internet and the technology that's there, I now can use my voice speaking with people in the United States, Switzerland, Germany, the UK, and here in Ireland. And it doesn't matter geographically where we are. We can share our voices, and this will help to improve patient involvement on into the future. But a couple of weeks ago, I also was a panelist where we're talking about patients in education. And I think this is what will help to improve patient involvement in the future. Having the patient as part of the education process, they're almost on a daily basis. So as we're training our new healthcare professionals into the future, they know what a patient is like. We're not alien. We're not just a set of symptoms. We're actually human. And I think that will change a lot of the way research is done and the way patients are treated when they get to hospital. We need more people like me willing to share our experience of our illnesses with researchers. We need to work collaboratively, working together, and we will find better solutions and more appropriate solutions for patients. Now, going back to my experience 17 years ago with Mary Harney, I think I'm much better placed today to maybe get this trial done. Perhaps now that I have learned through you, Patty, about the medicines development process, what I've learned in the university about day-to-day research challenges and the cost of it, perhaps now I would be better placed to make my argument for research in a medicine that could potentially improve the quality of life of people with MS and reduce the cost base for the country. What a change in 17 years. What opportunity there is now. And the work that PPI Ignite is doing, the work that NUIG is doing, and organizations like IPOSI, which are trying to ensure that there is more and more public and patient involvement in research into the future. Thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Robert. That was really interesting. And we have, I think the quote there of the day for me was that you're not just a set of symptoms, that we're actually humans. So we have a few questions for you. First from Teresa, she's commented, fantastic presentation. And she was just wondering what changes you made to the booklet for the MS users. And the second question, do you want to go with that first, Robert?
Yeah, I'll go with that one first. So basically, the booklet was, it's what's called a blind binding. So when you stand the book on its edge, on its spine, it's held together. And as somebody with MS, holding a book open is very, very difficult. So we actually changed it so that it has a ring binder like this on it, so it lies flat on the table. But we also changed the size of it. We changed some of the font, some of the colors. We added an extra pouch at the end of it. A lot of different small changes, but they all accumulated to make a bigger impact.
Thank you for that. I should say that I'm only involved for 6 years, so I've seen huge changes with our involvement. So it must be amazing over the 17 years. But the next question is from Emma, and she would like to know what was the thinking behind the title Embedded Patient Researcher, and I love the title.
When we were thinking about this, I'm not an assistant researcher. I'm a little bit different. So I don't think that's the correct term. And I'm not a researcher in the traditional sense. And we thought, we were thinking back to the journalists that work during the war. And a journalist goes in and is in the middle of the soldiers when they're fighting. And they call that an embedded journalist. And we thought that really that's what I am. I'm right in the middle of research, though I'm not a researcher per se, but I can contribute maybe to the experience. Now, we can argue about terms a little bit, but I think the most important thing is that it's a collaborative way of working within the research. We're all on the same team and we're all looking at the same goal. We're not working against each other, we're working with each other.
Okay, thank you for that, Robert. Now we'll probably leave it there, and then if anybody else has questions, will you just pop them in the chat, and Robert is with us for the rest of the morning, and hopefully he'll get back to you.
I'll do my best.
Thanks, Robert. And next we're going to go to Professor Martin O'Halloran, who's a European Research Council and the Science Foundation Ireland investigator here at the National University of Galway also. Martin is a co-lead of the PPI Ignite network at the university, and he has received over 30 national and international research awards. So the most recent of those being the Early Stage Researcher of the Year and European Research Council Starting Investigator Grant. So his presentation is also pre-recorded, so we will listen to it now and then we'll have question and answer time afterwards. So go ahead there, thank you.
Good morning. Firstly, I'd like to thank the PPI Ignite team for inviting me to talk about our work in embedding PPI in medical device development this morning. This has been an interesting journey for us as a team, and I'm delighted this morning just to talk about the transformation that has happened within our own research due to the growing influence of PPI, talk about some case studies where PPI has worked well, and also talk about the plan to, over the next 5 years, to expand on this work, and also some of the challenges that we'll face in this implementation. Just to add some context, one of the biggest challenges we face in medical device development is ensuring that excellent science results in excellent improvement or excellent impact in the clinic and in patient outcomes. So about 10 years ago, I was funded to develop a technology to improve outcomes for breast cancer patients, so to allow for earlier diagnosis of breast cancer. And at the very start of that project, we wanted to adopt best practice. So we looked at research groups in the US, in Europe, and in Asia who are working in this field of research. And what we found was that there were 200 researchers working in this space. But out of those 200, only 3 had ever tested their technology on a single patient. And so there was this real translational challenge of ensuring your technology could ever have that impact in the clinic and in the lives of patients. And the common denominator amongst the 3 successful groups was that they were embedded in a clinical facility, and they were developing their technologies with clinicians and with patients. And so in 2015, we moved our entire engineering team out of the university and into the hospital to ensure that any technology we were developing could have that impact on patients. if we look at the broader context of medical device innovation, we see that it is a core part of the Irish economy. So we are the second largest exporter of medical devices in Europe. It is 13% of our GDP. And 80% of cardiac stents used worldwide are manufactured here in Ireland. And as we learned during the COVID crisis, 50% of all ventilators used worldwide are manufactured here in Ireland. And if we look at the large multinational corporations, 13 of them have operations here in Ireland, and they are hiring, or they are employing 38,000 people. The interesting statistic that's not as often articulated is that out of the 350 medtech companies in Ireland, almost 3/4 of those companies are small indigenous Irish companies. And this environment presents a really nice opportunity for us to embed patient and public involvement into their R&D and their product development processes. I think it's important to set the scene by just defining what we did before we really engaged in public and patient and public involvement in research. We have 3 medtech innovation programs, the BioInnovate program, the Health Innovation Hub program, and Curum, which is an academic research center. And then we also provide training to Boston Scientific and Medtronic and Abbott on medical device innovation. And our general process is that we are needs-led. So we identify a problem within the health service first, and then we seek to develop a solution and to deploy that solution. Prior to engaging in PPI, we assumed that we would go into a hospital and through observing and discussions with clinicians and healthcare workers, we could define problems or unmet clinical needs. And there was also an assumption that through these discussions with clinicians and healthcare workers, that they adequately represented the voice of the patient and the public. Once we had identified the need, we could then deploy that, develop solutions and validate those solutions with clinicians and healthcare workers. Again, an assumption that the voice of the healthcare worker and the clinicians adequately represented the voice of the patient and the public. And then finally, we would trial our device based on, and design our trial based on input from clinicians and regulators, again, under the assumption that these clinicians, healthcare workers, and regulators adequately represented the voice of the patient and the public. So fundamental in how we worked prior to the PPI Ignite program was that we would implement this biodesign method. So we would put 12 high quality candidates each year with technical, commercial, or clinical experience and put them in the hospital. And their only job for 3 months was to write down lists of problems that they identified within the healthcare system. So problems for patients, problems for clinicians, problems of efficiencies. We picked 3 clinical areas each year, so areas like cardiology, vascular surgery, orthopedics, and those teams would identify real and important problems within those areas. And so they did that for 3 months. So they came out of that training with a long list of problems. And so typically over that 3-month period, they would identify 1,000 problems in the healthcare system or in how particular diseases are diagnosed and treated. And then next, they would spend the next 6 months ranking or filtering those needs. So ranking them by the impact that solving that need would have on the patient or the healthcare service. They would also rank them by potential market size, the cost of doing a clinical trial, the regulatory barriers to getting a solution onto the market, and they would present each week on their filtering to the innovation program team, who would give them feedback on their filtering. So in November, they would have 1,000 needs, and all of the time they're ranking them by patient impact, payer impact, physician impact. So they're essentially trying to let the really impactful needs bubble to the top. So by February of each year, they've identified one need that is urgent and would really transform patient care. So with that program, the BioInnovate program, we would develop 3 to 4 startup companies a year based on identifying that really impactful clinical problem. About 3 years ago or 4 years ago, we started a second program called the Health Innovation Hub, which is to allow us to expand this methodology into more hospitals and more healthcare settings. So the Health Innovation Hub has offices in the hospital in Galway, in Cork, and in Dublin. And within those offices, there is a team of people who help identify really important needs, but also to develop a pathway to solving those needs. So when a doctor or a physician would come into the office, the Health Innovation Hub office, we would take their need and we would, again, filter it or rank it to say what would be the impact of solving this need for the patient, for the healthcare system, for the payer, so the HSE or the private insurer. What would be the impact of solving this problem? And for the really impactful projects, we would help develop or put a pathway in place to develop that solution. The obvious thing in all of these innovation programs is that we assumed that we were capturing the entire context of a problem by talking to clinicians, healthcare workers, and HSE employees. But for all of you who work in PPI, we're obviously really just seeing a small part of the problem. And so when we started working in PPI in our first ever projects, we were genuinely surprised when we started talking to public and talking to the patients and realizing that actually their needs were often very different to the needs prioritized by physicians and healthcare workers. So now within each and every innovation program, medical device innovation program in Ireland, we are ensuring that the first step in needs finding, the first step in the process is that we train the researchers in good PPI methodology so that they're ethical, that they're engaging with the patient and the public as equals, and they're avoiding tokenism. So what does that do to our conveyor belt of projects? Well, it affects every part of that development pathway. So what we begin to see is that there are now more patient prioritized needs being identified. When we're developing a solution now, we look at patient-centered design. So how does the patient feel about the solution? How does the public feel about the solution? And not just the healthcare worker or the clinician who's treating the patient. And finally, when we get to deployment and we're evaluating our device in a clinical trial, what are the what should we measure in that trial that's important to the patient? So embedding patient-reported outcomes in our trial. So maybe now we can just talk about 2 examples of where this methodology is bearing fruit and where it's working well. So Luminet Medical is a startup which was interested in improving patient outcomes for patients who are undergoing chemotherapy. And if we followed our traditional BioInnovate method and just talked to physicians and oncologists would say hair loss is not really an important problem. Our goal as physicians is to treat the cancer, and hair loss is just a natural side effect of effective cancer treatment. But when you start talking to patients, they will say, actually, hair loss is probably one of the most traumatic aspects of our treatment. So about 7% of patients will actually stop chemotherapy treatment because of the trauma of hair loss. And when you talk to patients in the public, they'll say, well, actually, hair loss is important for me personally, but often as a parent, they worry about the impact of their children seeing this visible sign of a parent's illness. So they really want to protect themselves and also their children from the trauma of hair loss and the connotations that come with it. So if we look at the existing therapies for patients who want to preserve their hair, it's primarily using cold therapy. So wearing a cold cap, which reduces drug delivery to the hair follicles. But patients will tell you that they're very painful, that they're time consuming. So they require patients to wait in hospital for hours after their chemotherapy treatment, that they're cumbersome to use, and that they pose an infection risk because they're shared amongst patients. And to address this, Luminate Medical is developing a patient-centered device. So this is a device which doesn't involve any cold therapy, so it's much more comfortable for the patient. And importantly, the device is portable. So that means that the patients can take the device home immediately after their chemotherapy. It means their chemotherapy treatment is as short as possible. And also that the patients can retain their hair and avoid all the trauma and the psychological distress that's associated with it. Another example that we worked on this year was a device to provide a non-surgical therapy for lung cancer treatment. And again, as part of this project, we talked to surgeons, and the most common feedback we got was that the best treatment for lung cancer is open surgery. And the advantage of open surgery is that it allows the physician to look the patient in the eye and tell them, okay, we've removed all of the cancer and you're now cancer-free. So we went out then, in total, we conducted 126 interviews to really understand the problem. And we also engaged with patient advocates and also opened discussions with patients themselves to really understand the problem. And the feedback that we got from them was very different. So while patients were glad that they were cancer-free, they really struggled with the number of procedures that they had to undergo, and also the chronic side effects of open surgery, which was long-term breathlessness and long-term chronic pain. So the challenge that they provided us with was that if we could provide a non-surgical single intervention procedure that would treat the cancer, but really importantly, improve the problems of breathlessness and chronic pain that are associated with open surgery. So again, this project for us highlighted that clear disconnect between what the patients prioritized and also what the clinicians prioritized, and how important it was to understand the full picture around a particular clinical condition, and also to involve patients in the need identification, the solution development, and also the evaluation of that solution within a clinical trial. So now a pillar of all of our projects is to understand the view of the person dealing with a particular disease and the impact of solving that problem on those patients. And so, supported through the PPI team here in Galway, we did a lot of involvement activities with these patients as an expert panel to guide the need identification, but also the solution direction. So just to summarize where we are and maybe some of the challenges that we'll face over the next 5 years, I think the PPI work to date has been a huge success, and it allows all of these companies to develop products that are better for patients and the public, and that are designed to meet the need of those patients and the public. So now our goal is that no medical innovation project should start or continue without clear PPI embedded into the program. So we are involving PPI or training PPI within the BioInnovate program, within the Health Innovation Hub program, within the Quorum Academic Centre for the next 5 years. All our industry training now has a PPI module, and even within the HSE, where we teach on a Masters in Digital Transformation, we're embedding training in PPI. So what will that lead to over the next 5 years? Well, hopefully, and we're seeing this already clearly, that there are more patient prioritized needs being identified through these innovation programs. What we're beginning to see now is that more and more that the solutions are more patient-centered. And so we're seeing that continual involvement all through the development life cycle, where feedback from patients is requested at every stage of development. And then we're also seeing that it's feeding into the outcomes measured in trials. So what are we measuring, and is it impactful for the patient and for the public? I think the long-term goal is to ensure that, and this is probably the challenge, to ensure that all of this activity is done in the sense of a true partnership with groups meeting as equals, and where all voices are respected. And I think that's the challenge for us. I think the need is clearly there. The value of patient involvement and public involvement in research is very clear. And the challenge for us is to do that in a very respectful and on an equal footing. And what I'd love to hear from the people here today is advice and support, and how we can do that, and how we can ensure that the next 5 years is as successful and as fruitful as the last 5. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That was a fantastic, fascinating presentation, really interesting. I'm just starting my video. So we have the question and answer section now, and I'd like to introduce Professor Ava Lowry. Is a consultant breast and endocrine surgeon in Galway University Hospital, an associate professor of translational research and regenerative surgery in NUI Galway. And Ava trained in Ireland and France, and she did her PhD on biomarkers in the detection of breast cancer. And she also holds a Master of Medical Science and a diploma in clinical education. Ava, welcome. I think you're there. Ava, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks very much.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, great to meet you. I am really interested, and I was fascinated by that piece, because this time 2 years ago I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and that didn't bother me at all. But I have to say the hair loss was a bit of a problem. And was it true? I just wasn't quite sure. Did Martin say that 70% stop chemotherapy because of this?
No, 7%.
Oh, 7%. Thanks, I was wondering. Yeah. So, yes, incredible. But we'd just like to hear some. Ava, would you like to give us a little bit on your experience?
Yeah, I suppose I've been working with Martin on a few of the projects that he outlined there. And I suppose for me, it's been a massive learning curve, particularly recognizing that as a clinician and as a surgeon treating the patients, my priorities often lie with looking at disease-free survival, overall survival. How do we improve diagnosis? How do we improve survival-related outcomes? But patients, as Robert said in his presentation, aren't just the disease, and they're not just a collection of symptoms. There's a whole life behind every patient. A patient themselves may be a carer for children or for elderly people. They have a job. And being able to understand the priorities and the different ways that treatment impacts the patient's quality of life is hugely important. And having the patient voice in identifying what our outcomes should be and what we should be focusing on has really changed my perspective on research over the last couple of years, and particularly for breast cancer, when survival outcomes have improved so dramatically. Patients are now living after breast cancer and living with breast cancer for a long, long time. So we really have to shift our focus now to the quality of that life and the issues that affect patients in the experience of treatment and the experience after treatment. And I think that's something that we cannot do without having a genuine patient voice at the table.
Yeah, there's a question here in from Martha, great presentation. And really it's about, do you find it difficult to embed PPI in such a highly regulated area?
So that's kind of really interesting for me, because if you look at regulators now, they want input they want to show that you've taken input into the end user of a device as part of your regulatory submission. So I actually think it's going to become a requirement going forward. So to get a device approved in the US, you have to do this type of work. Now, normally, if the device is used by clinicians, you engage with clinicians, but what we're seeing now is more and more devices are home use medical devices or patient-centered medical devices. And so to get your device on the market, you have to consider how suitable is it for use by the patient and how much patient input has gone into that design. So I think the regulator will probably push for more PPI, which is a very positive thing.
Absolutely. And another question here, how best to formally evaluate the PPI contributions to your research pipeline? An interesting question.
So I absolutely don't have the answer to that, but I think what's really interesting is that the more PPI we do, the more industry in particular is realizing the potential of the sector. So, you know, we work with lots of medtech companies, and as an example, Teleflex come into the university and the hospital to get feedback on their technology. And now the question they're asking is, well, while we're here, we should also involve patients and talk to them about how our device meets their needs or doesn't meet their needs. So I don't know how we separate that out, but I can only see growth in these patient-centered needs and patient-centered devices over the next 5 years, just because it's a big opportunity for companies to work in this space.
Thank you, Martin. I know we have Helen Rochford Brennan in the audience, who I spoke about earlier, and I don't know if Helen can actually speak, if we can unmute her. She wanted to say something. Where's my IT people? If not, Helen, you'll have to put it in the chat. And while we're waiting to resolve
Thank you.
Oh, there you are you? Yes, Helen. Go ahead.
Thank you, everybody. One of the joys of my illness, which is the brain disorder of Alzheimer's, is that you cannot do two things together. I cannot listen to Roger and I cannot listen to Martin. And so I just wanted to say, first of all, Roger, thank you very much for your presentations, and all of you. Start my video. Okay, the host is telling me to start my video. Okay, I hope it has started.
Yes, you have, Helen. Continue.
Okay, thank you. Roger, I want to say we've come a long way. I'm afraid I could add a few years to you, more like 25 in my time working disability. And when we got those words, nothing about us without us. It's important that we are involved. I have to say that for my own involvement as a person with the chronic illness that I have, it's important that my voice is heard in every piece of research that we do. And I would just say to Martin, you know, we need to be asked. And what we find a lot is that we are not asked. So if we are not asked until the last moment, then that is quite difficult, because when I'm involved in research, I want to plan the research. I want to set the strategies. and I want to be part of the solution. And I certainly want to be part of the dissemination, because all too often the dissemination never is sent out. So it's important that we know that we're valued and respected. And we have come such a long way. But one word that I seem to be missing a bit today is, you know, we have a right to be there. It's my human right. And I just want to remind you of that, that it's important that when we talk about patient involvement, we also talk about the rights of people to be involved. And I'm delighted that over the years, and I want to thank NUIG for giving me the confidence to be able to get out there and speak about PPI. But you know what? I'm only talking about myself. I'm only talking about my life. And I'm just an ordinary person. I'm an ordinary mum, just trying to get on with my life. But I think my voice is so important. Today, if somebody told me when I was diagnosed 9 years ago, you know, that I would have the great honor of working with Eamon O'Shea and his team at the Centre for Economic and Social Research, with Eleanor Flynn from the Law and Disability, to Edel Murphy, who's who's leading this team across Ireland, and who I'm so delighted to see the marvelous work that's been done in public patient involvement. Today, I work on setting international standards. I work with the World Health Organization, with the Global Dementia Observatory on their knowledge exchange program. I work with Alzheimer's Europe. I'm a global dementia ambassador. I would have done none of this in the beginning if it wasn't for the support and encouragement of people like you, Martin, that, you know, are involving the patient. And I just want to say about medication, I'm involved with Alzheimer's Europe, everything from clinical research to technology, and technology is the most important thing I can be involved in today, because we need it more than ever. But if our medicines are not reviewed, and if they have horrendous side effects, then we need to be talked to. We are not being spoken to, and I think it's really important. And I say this all the time in my involvement with pharma. Medications need to be reviewed, and there has to be public patient involvement in that. And that is all I want to say. I'm sorry that I was not able to put it in the chat, but I think it's important that I do say what I have to say, because I work on behalf of all of you on many governmental things, for not just for Ireland, but for Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Fantastic inspiration, and Helen has kept me going in this role of advocating for the person. I suppose there's nothing else to say after that. We're just gone a little over time. We'd like to thank Martin and Ava for the presentation. And if you have any other questions, there are still a few questions and comments in the chat box, but they're staying with us, so they'll look through and hopefully get back to everybody. That's a lot of food for thought, what's already happened, gone through this morning. So we're going to go to a short break. We need everybody back at 11:15, so it's really only a comfort break. And then we have the parallel sessions. So thank you all for joining, and I hope to see you back in probably about 12 minutes, and enjoy the rest of the morning. Thank you.
Hi everyone, thanks very much. We're gonna start back now again, if that's okay, if you're all back from your coffee and your scones. So this is the part of the conference where we're going to go into some parallel sessions. So if you've had a look at the program and you would like to view the PPI contributor panel, which will be chaired by Wendy Costello and Dr. Ruth McMenamin, please stay where you are. You don't need to go anywhere. If you've had a look at the program and you'd like to join the session where the theme is including the excluded, or the alternative room where the theme is PPI around the world, if you just roll your mouse to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a black bar that I have a photo of here. And if you click on the breakout rooms there, you should be able to join either PPI around the world or including the excluded. So if you'd like to join either of them sessions, please go into that breakout room. If you'd like to watch the PPI panel discussion, please stay in this main room. And if anyone is having any issues at all to join their breakout room, please just pop it into the chat and I'll assign you manually. So if you just write in what room you'd like to be in, I'll assign you manually. So that's it for the instructions in getting into the breakout rooms. I hope you all can get into your respective rooms, and any issues, please just pop it into the chat and I will assign you manually. So just to roll your mouse to the bottom of your screen, there should be an option for breakout rooms. When you click on the breakout rooms, you should be able to join either including the excluded or PPI around the world. If you want to join those sessions and you're unable to do so, please pop it in the chat and I will assign you manually. If you would like to take part and listen in to the PPI panel discussion, please stay here in the main room. Thanks very much. So I'll hand over to Ruth and Wendy now, the chairs of this session.
Thanks, Martha. And Wendy, I think you're going to start off there with introductions.
Great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's great to see so many participants online today. So I'm Wendy Costello, and I run a charity called ICAN, which is the Irish Children's Arthritis Network. My daughter has juvenile arthritis since she was 3. She's now 22. So my involvement in PPI over the last 15 years has been so rewarding. And this conference in particular has been a highlight for me for the last 3 or 4 years. So to be actually involved in the organising committee for the last 2 years has been a real pleasure. The team is amazing to work with, and every year this conference builds and builds. And this session was of particular interest to me because I want to hear new voices every year. I think that's really, really important. Everybody knows me and has seen me. Nobody wants to hear my story again. I want to hear from the younger generation coming up and what they're going to do to push forward in PPI and make a difference. So that's a little bit about me. And Ruth, I'll let you say hello before we move on to the panel introductions.
Yeah, hello everybody. And like Wendy, I'm also delighted to be part of the organising committee for the conference. Can't believe it's the 6th conference and it's growing every year, which is great. My name is Ruth McMenamin. I'm a lecturer in speech and language therapy at NUI Galway, and I'm the co-lead for PPI Ignite at NUI Galway, and I'm co-leading the network in the university with Professor Martin O'Halloran, who you just heard speak in the previous session. So yeah, my PPI work, I suppose, has been largely focused with people with stroke and with aphasia. I'm delighted to be working with Martina Green and the Heart, who's the coordinator of the Heart and Stroke groups in the west of Ireland. And we're doing some great work around public awareness of aphasia with people who have stroke and who have aphasia. So just delighted to be here today. Thank you for joining us.
So we will start with Avril. And Avril, if you would like to introduce yourself.
Sure, hello, my name is Avril Daly. I'm the CEO of an international umbrella organisation which is patient-led, called Retina International. And essentially our organisation has 46 member organisations around the world, all patient-led, all funding and supporting research into rare and inherited forms of retinal degeneration and also age-related forms of retinal degeneration. And so, of course, very focused on research. And I worked here in Ireland for many years with an organisation that you might be familiar with, Fighting Blindness. I'm sure maybe some representatives are on the line here today. So I've learned, I suppose, in 20 years of working in research, I've seen a lot of development. So really that's kind of what I'm here to share today, the development from not being listened to hopefully being listened to a little bit more these days.
Thanks, Avril. Jack, would you like to say hello?
Yep, of course. Hi, my name is Jack Gaffey. I'm a youth researcher and undergraduate student in NUI Galway. I've been a member of the PPI Ignite at NUI Galway's public advisory panel, where effective since 2018, where I've been given my own advice as a young person on kind of what direction PPI has been going on over the last couple of years.
Thank you, Jack. Emily?
Hi, my name's Emily Atkinson. I'm studying psychology in NUIG, and I'm the member of a youth advocacy panel. So for youth mental health. So I collaborate with researchers working in youth mental health, and I advocate for the experiences of young people and making sure that their voice is heard in every stage of the research process. So this has included listening to research proposals, and future studies, and advising on possible changes to the research to ensure that at every step of the way that the voices and the experiences of young people are at the center, and make sure that's always included.
Great. Precious, I didn't have the privilege to meet you before today. I've met some other people, but you're very welcome. So if you want to introduce yourself. You're on mute, which is the new wording for 2020 and 2021.
Sorry. Hi.
Good morning, everyone. Hello.
Hi, my name is Jessica Mulcahy-Simmons. I'm a research assistant at UCD in the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Infectious Diseases.
No, we heard you there a second ago. Do you want to try again?
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
I think we're getting cross in from another room, are we, Martha?
Yeah, so it's just Precious that Wendy is asking to introduce herself at the moment, please.
My name is Precious Chubane. I study applied social sciences at NUIG. I've been attending meetings for PPI with Una.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
And Teresa, I think it's just you left.
Thank you, Wendy, and thank you everyone for having me here. I'm probably one of the newer people to PPI compared to a lot that have spoken today. I've been in a group for about 2 years. So I started with the Primary Care Clinical Trials Network here in Galway. And I suppose a bit different from others, I didn't come into it with a particular health issue or any sort of advocacy in mind. I kind of stumbled on it accidentally. A friend of mine, actually, the wonderful Carmel Gagan, who's doing some of the presenting today, introduced me to the idea of PPI, and I had never heard of it before, but find it absolutely fascinating and so gratifying to think that as individuals, we have a direct impact on the research that's being done. So since then, I've also seen opportunities for a couple of other groups. Since then, I've joined another one. It's a priority setting partnership, an international advisory panel, which a lot of those words were even over my head a year ago. We discuss methodology, which there have been calls where I've contributed nothing at all. I haven't even asked a question because a lot of the discussion was over my head, but another time I might simply ask a question that I often will preface with, I hope this isn't a stupid question, but I've seen discussion come out of something I've asked that has led to actual change in thinking in the way that we've proceeded with our research. And another board that I was on was newly joining the ARC group, so looking at moving oral medication for cancer patients to a more local setting, and also helped with our recent health advisory board funding application interview, which was very personally challenging, but extremely rewarding just to watch the process, learn more about PPI. And we were awarded the funding, which was so exciting, and to see the opportunities for the next 5 years that are opening up to our group is just so exciting.
Well, I think that's a really good point, because PPI obviously is public and patient, but we hear from so many patients, like you said, and family members, but to actually have a public member is fantastic. So it's great to have your perspective today.
Thanks, Wendy.
So the way we thought that we would run this session really is that we would invite the panel members to respond to just a couple of kind of topic areas, and if people listening have any questions, they can, you know, put them up in the chat, and Wendy and I will then work to ask the questions you pose to the panel. So the first area I suppose we wanted to look at, and just listening to you there, Teresa, you've been speaking about that already, which was your motivations for getting involved in PPI. So this is something that I think maybe if there's people listening who are interested in getting involved in PPI, if the panel could share their experiences about how and why you got involved. So would anybody like to speak to that question?
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Avril.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting listening to the rest of the panel, and you know, it's great actually, because hearing people who are coming to this very new, I just feel I've been at this a long time, and you know, I actually would like to hear more from people who are fresh to this, because they're starting in it at a time where there's a proper process and sort of structure around PPI, although of course we still have to fight for it. You know, when I started, you know, my work in 2000 in fighting blindness, I went in, I was a very young person, I was in my 20s, and I went into a public affairs role. I had a background in advocacy myself, but I also happened to be a person who was living with a rare eye disease, retinitis pigmentosa. And although it wasn't really affecting me very severely at the time, I was very curious about the fact that research was happening in Ireland. And when I was diagnosed with my condition, I was told that Ireland was a leading centre for research into rare retinal eye diseases, or retinitis pigmentosa, as I was then diagnosed with. And I thought this was fascinating. So I really wanted to get involved with what was a very small organisation, really tiny, and you know, a couple of part-time staff and 2 full-time staff. And, you know, looking, as I said, at the rare inherited forms of retinal disease, but also the age-related diseases. And they themselves were an organization, you know, who were patients. They didn't have a scientific background. You know, they started in 1983. So you can imagine what things were like back then. You know, when they wanted to fund this research into this genetic form of eye disease, and not a lot was known about genetics. There was things happening in other parts of the world, but not necessarily really here. And it was considered too niche to fund by state funders and other types of funders. So these patients got together and they funded, they found a way in what were very challenging economic times in the 80s to find, you know, the money to support the research. And Retina International, which is the umbrella group that I now work with, were already in existence and brought the kind of global patient groups together once every 2 years to talk about ways in which they could influence each other and help to set up these organizations. So very globally connected from the outset, you know, at a time where we didn't have internet. And many of you on the call today won't know that we used to have to get, you know, operators to put us through and a newsletter every couple of months. And there was no such, and, you know, it was just entirely different. And even when I started in 2000, the internet was pretty new. I mean, you wouldn't want to imagine what Google looked like. It was like green with black writing, and you know, it was just weird. You know, so it's very hard to explain how different it was. But what was really important was at that time, the researchers then in Trinity College in Dublin really listened to the patients and what their expectations were, what their needs were, and that was a very important thing, because I think what we must realize as lay people, you know, that, you know, research is driven generally by, you know, a scientific discovery of a particular molecule that researchers will look at and say, well, maybe this is application to our area of interest, so let's move on with that, you know. So reaching out to patients, you know, and understanding, well, actually, what does this mean to us is very important. And being able to align globally is really important as well. And the work that our community has been engaged with is now leading to, we have a treatment, a gene therapy on the market. It's not reimbursable to everybody right now, but that's an entirely different story for another form of patient engagement. But the reality is that treatments do happen. We have pipeline, we have clinical trials happening. There's real hope for treatment. But I suppose from my perspective, what I think is very important is when you see treatments coming down the line, we can't forget to support our researchers in the basic area of research. You know, it's very important because, as a colleague of mine always says, you can't have the shiny boxes, you have to have something to put into the shiny boxes. And there is still an awful lot more that we need to understand, particularly in the area that I'm concerned with it, which is genetic diseases. There's a lot more to know. There's a lot of unmet need, you know, and that's very important for us to continue to sort of support that, because really, in my experience, and looking at what you know, started as concepts that were developed by the researchers and considered by the patients, you know, and giving their opinion, have now led to treatments. So the earliest stage of engagement around that concept, that basic curiosity-driven piece of research, is incredibly important. And if you're serious about, you know, as a researcher, and you want to find a therapy for an unmet need, it's very important to ask those questions at the very, very earliest stage, because you don't want to be the researcher sitting at an EMA scientific advice committee and standing up with, you know, presenting on an extremely, you know, fantastic piece of innovation and science, and for the patient representative to stand up and say, well, you know, this is really important, but it's not going to affect me. It's not going to benefit me. It's far too late. And from a personal perspective, if I take away all of the work that I do, the reason that I'm personally passionate about PPI is because I have witnessed that, and it's something that I never want to witness again. So this is where PPI is incredibly important, and just where my own personal motivation has been. I think it's amazing, you know, to see the development, and for me, it's highly motivating to hear the voices I've heard so far who are engaging in this at an early stage. It's across the board, across healthcare. It's really great to see.
You've given us lots of food for thought there, Avril. So I'm listening to those early stages 20 years ago or more, about your own personal motivation for, you know, from living with a condition yourself and wanting to find out more about it, your background in advocacy, your curiosity, your drive almost to look for these treatments with the researchers and work together. So lots of different ideas there about motivations for getting involved. And listening to Teresa earlier there, you were saying, Teresa, that it was someone you knew, so Carmel, who kind of introduced you to PPI. So that was another way of getting involved. And I'm just wondering if Jack or Emily or Precious had any different experiences of, you know, motivations for getting involved with PPI initially.
From my experience, it's quite similar to Teresa in a way, because a friend introduced me to the app. There was a bring a friend evening, so to try and recruit more members.
Great.
The existing members were asked to bring a friend, and that was me. And I didn't really know much going into it at all. I was kind of given very, you know, basic information, kind of there to kind of present the ideas of other young people in mental health research. And then, you know, I went to one meeting and it was very informal. We weren't, you know, asked to commit, you know, wholeheartedly to it. It was just to kind of tell us what it was about and if we were interested in it. And it was very laid back, but it was also, you could tell that they were very interested in getting young people from all sorts of backgrounds. You know, it is really important to have people with all levels of experience and diverse, you know, opinions, you know, in research and mental health research especially. And yeah, it was, you know, you could tell it was very valuable what we were doing. And that made it a lot easier to stay involved. And then kind of over time, you could see how your contribution was affecting it. So people would come into us with research proposals, or they might have been doing qualitative interviews.
Yeah.
And then you know, you might find out a couple of weeks or months down the line that something that you said, or something that a group conclusion or input that really affected the outcome, or, you know, something that you suggested might have helped them get funding. So I think
Teresa,
that really,
I'm going to interrupt you briefly there, just because there's a question coming for you in the chat, and it was, can I ask Teresa, was there anything that made it feel easier to ask questions or to contribute at meetings? So when you look back to those early meetings, Teresa, was there anything that kind of helped you to contribute or get involved in those early stages?
Yeah, for sure. When I look back, I think our program managers did a really good job of always giving everyone an opportunity to speak. So it can be kind of intimidating if you're in a room with a lot of researchers or people that are quite knowledgeable, to chime in maybe with something that you feel might be a foolish question, that they always bring it around and check in with each of us and asked us, you know, have you any contribution or do you have any questions? I would quite often too have terms that I would jot down that I didn't know quite what they meant. And after the meetings, I'd email the managers as well, and they would send me resources to research, which was really helpful too. It was never implied whether they thought it at any point, but it was never implied that there were stupid questions or that anything was too simple or basic to ask. I thought the respect level was something I've always really enjoyed. I think they've done a fantastic job that way.
That was great. And sorry, Emily, I didn't mean to cut you off there. I went to pose that question to you as well, because you talked about getting involved with the friend, you know, that's how you heard about it. And was there anything additional that helped you to contribute, you know, different from what Teresa's just mentioned?
I think it was quite similar to Teresa in a way, like we were always kind of asked how we were feeling and our input. And if we had any other questions, we were free to email Emma or Emer. They were kind of facilitating the app afterwards, and they were, you know, very helpful and always checking in with us that we were comfortable with everything. And I think it was more like a facilitated discussion more than anything else that was happening, that everyone was asked for their input regardless of their experience. Like I'm a psychology student, so I already have interest in mental health, but then other people might have come from a background of they were more engaged in services. So it was the fact that everyone was interested in everyone's opinion was probably the main thing, and it was a very comfortable environment. And also the researchers that came in, they were very interested in what we had to say as well, which was really important, and they found it very valuable to their research and the feedback we gave. So I think it's, you know, when it's a comfortable environment where no one is made to feel stupid, and that everyone has their own, you know, experiences and opinions to give.
That makes a difference.
Yeah, exactly.
Thanks so much, because there's lots of ideas there about why you might get involved. And I'm just wondering, maybe Precious and Jack, if there's anything that strikes you about why you would stay involved once you get involved. You know, so you're both involved in different PPI groups, and I'm just wondering if you've any thoughts about why you'd stay involved with those groups.
I can answer that if that's okay.
Thanks, Jack.
Of course. No, for me, I think one of the biggest kind of stay factors is the sense of community that working with PPI has really brought to me. Both in kind of with the public advisory panel, the leaders of those panels, so Adele Murphy, Adele Tierney, and Martha Killia, they're such a beneficial influence on us and kind of keeping us up to date and kind of always letting us know when the next PPI is on and involved in kind of conferences like these. They are such fantastic motivating factors, as well as just the wider panel as well. Getting to sit down and talk to everyone and hear their opinions. It's wonderful, really. It's actually one of my favorite parts of kind of the last 3 years of working with PPI, and that kind of develops further into you know, these meetings where you're talking about you feel like you're really part of something, and that you're making a valuable input. And I think I'm quite the same as Teresa. A lot of the members of the public advisory panel have been involved in activism for a long time, and sometimes it can feel like a bit of a small fish in a big pond. but in the same way, you always feel like what you have to say is valid and kind of valued, and to that really leads to kind of you feel like you're making a difference in a way, and I think you are making a difference.
Fantastic, Jack. Lots of really good ideas there around communication, facilitation is important of the meetings, and that sense again of feeling valued and that you're making a valuable contribution and being listened to. Thanks so much for that. Precious, is there anything additional that you wanted to add there, or do you think it's covered at this stage in terms of motivations?
I would like to say it's so good to meet every month and we talk different topics.
Yes.
That will make me keep on coming to the PPI, and I learn new things every day.
Okay, so new learning, exactly, and meeting the people every month. Great. Yeah, they're all really important things.
Yeah, and I think what's coming across really strongly is that everybody feels they're on a level playing field. Emily and Jack both said, I felt really comfortable. Like to walk into that first meeting for Emily must have been quite daunting. So to feel so comfortable and at ease straight away is just amazing. So it shows how far we've come in developing these tools and these workshops to make sure that everybody feels that way. So what I want to provoke and think about from everybody, and also in the chat, if you could put in your comments too, is the challenges. So we really need to speak about these and explore them more. So the challenges of staying involved in PPI are huge for all of us, and very different for all of us. And some of us end up, like Robert was saying earlier on, staying involved, and maybe it ends up as a career for some people. For lots of us, like myself, it's a completely volunteer role, trying to find the time to fit it all in. So would anybody like to start off on that question on the challenges? Not as many challenges. Avril, I'll get you to start.
I think the challenges really when it comes to getting patients involved is time. And it depends on the cohort of patients. I mean, if it's a very specific group that, scientists are looking for information from and engagement from, it's very hard for parents who are dealing with small, maybe sick children, or anybody who is dealing with a partner or a spouse or parent or wherever, where they're providing care. And it's often the case, unfortunately. And people themselves, who are unwell, trying to make things as easy as possible for them to be engaged. I think for our community, what is important is, we're dealing with people who have vision impairment at various levels and various degrees. And of course, our whole world has gone online now, and to some that's great because they're proficient on computers, and some people, aren't. But there's always I think something that's come out for us a lot, and it's global, but it's also here, is not everybody is online. Not everybody can participate in that way.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to go back to basics, the telephone, and that's very important to understand. So time and access is really important, and also geographical spread. Getting people not just from I'm living in Dublin, I'm not from Dublin, I'm living here, and oftentimes it's very Dublin centric. And it's important to be able to capture the perspectives of people living in different areas, because their reality is entirely different, and their relationship to their condition can often be entirely different depending on where they live. So these kinds of things are important. So it's getting as broad a group as possible to engage is a challenge.
Yeah, I think Jack was going to say something there as well, Wendy. Thanks so much, Avril.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. What I was going to say was actually this. Yeah, it is kind of an issue of time. When I'm working, either kind of part-time, as this is coming from very much a youth perspective, and kind of just being an undergraduate, that sometimes just kind of life takes over. And when you're working on a voluntary basis, there's priorities happen, and it's unfortunate because you do care about PPI and getting involved. Sometimes things just happen like that. And one thing that I've always found commendable, though, as a result, is that PPI has always been the members and people who work at PPI have always been very willing to let you come back in. you could fall off the face of the earth for a couple of months while you have midterms or finals, and as soon as you get back in touch again, they'll be just as welcoming as they were before. It's like nothing ever happened. That's something that's actually always kind of touched me as very important. And I think also a huge challenge as well, as Avril was saying, is kind of the shift that has had to be made to online spaces, especially some contributors for either health reasons or otherwise can't get involved in that way and have had to drop off over the years, which is unfortunate. But it's something we're all going through now. And as I said before, because PPI and the people involved in PPI are so welcoming, it's fantastic to know that once we're out of this kind of unfortunate situation we're in, that those who have had to leave will be welcomed immediately right back in.
Thanks, Jack. Teresa, you wanted to say something?
I would agree with both of them in the same way that I feel like time is often one of the biggest issues as well. But one of the things I found really useful was if a project was clear as possible with how many hours, maybe what the expectation was, how many hours you had to do between meetings, how many meetings there were going to be, set out the schedule so that you can be sure you don't overcommit, because that's something easy to do too. You kind of want to be on all of these projects. They all sound fascinating, but that you're not really good to anyone if you're on too many of them. The other just quick thing too, having to work virtually now definitely hasn't suited everyone. We lost a few of our members when we had to go online, and they haven't engaged at all in the last year, which is really unfortunate. And I imagine there were people that couldn't always come to our in-person meetings as well because of health issues. So I'd love to see, if possible, going forward, if there was some sort of hybrid version we could do where those that can meet in person could be in a room, but there would be some sort of connectivity for people that aren't able to travel, that might be a nice model going forward.
And do you think, and this is to everybody, but obviously, Teresa, you're speaking at the moment, do you think that if you were getting reimbursement or payment the same as everybody else on the project, that would be an incentive to keep you involved and would make up for that loss of, trying to find that time? Or do you think if you are a volunteer on that project that, sometimes if you're not getting reimbursed, that, you feel it's not top of your priority list?
There definitely is an element, and it is helpful at least to be reimbursed, I think, for expenses. And from what I understand, a lot of that wasn't in place until fairly recently. But I would imagine for a lot of people, it would have to impact if you can make the time. Financial burdens are different for everyone. I would have to imagine that would make it easier for some people to allot time to it.
And have you always been offered reimbursement just out of interest?
I have actually for each project I've been on. Yes.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. The chat has got a few questions. I'm just going to look at one of them. Yeah, a lot of people talking about the challenges of online. And this is from Aisling, would you have any advice on running initial PPI events online remotely compared to in person? How to facilitate that group team atmosphere? Emily, I don't know if you want to maybe start with that one, because your initial was so welcoming, and how would that have played out if it was online?
I think if someone was thinking of setting up one, it might be helpful to try and sit in or be involved in one that's already running, just to see how the environment is. But I think it probably is more difficult getting people involved online, because in person kind of is a bit more informal in a way, that when it's online kind of it's more, you're making a decision to be there at that time. But then again, there are, certain ways to facilitate it, like making sure everyone has a chance to speak, maybe calling on people to ask their opinion. But again, I think it's more making people feel comfortable. I'm not directing where the conversation goes, and more kind of facilitating it, making sure everyone's voice is heard. But it is a challenge, I think. It was definitely, I feel like it's a bit more constrained online, because as well, I feel like there's more of a time limit. as such. But when you're in person, like if someone needs to leave, one person can leave the meeting and it can continue. So I feel like it was possibly more creative when we were there in person. I don't know if that's helpful, but
yeah, no, it is, and I'm really worried that that's actually coming out of our conversation today, that lots of PPI people are pulling out of a lot of stuff that they're involved in because of the online presence we have to do now. I know I'm a little bit zoomed out myself, to be honest. I'm finding it hard to focus on all the projects I have to do, because you miss that social interaction, you miss that meeting up with everybody. So it is a huge challenge. And just move on to the next question, because I know time is going so quickly. How has your involvement as a PPI contributor impacted you? For me, it has completely changed my life. There's no doubt about it. And it's now changing my daughter's life as she becomes involved in PPI. So I'll be interested to hear how it has impacted our panel. Avril, it's had a huge impact on your life.
Yes, and it's interesting to see how it's evolved, really, from when I started out working in this space. You were kind of an afterthought in science. You were always involved in the dissemination and information, so that meant, putting the research piece into your newsletter. It wasn't really an active, involvement in that way. But, that has changed over the years in many respects. But what I find very valuable is what I've learned about the scientists and what they have to do, and the environment in which they work, and how you can really contribute to supporting that. Because I have to say my background is in advocacy, it's in policy development. So when you're talking to researchers and you're actually seeing the fact, where their pressures are, and their pressures are clear, and I think right across science and clinical research and all of the, the areas that we're talking about today, there are huge pressures. There's pressures to publish, there's pressures to get funding, to keep very good scientists in their area of interest, and why that is so incredibly difficult and becoming even more difficult, as we move forward. That's a real challenge. And you start to see as a policy person, where those gaps are, and where maybe by working together, you can learn how to plug those gaps or develop infrastructures that might be able to support better. So I think it's my experience, and I suppose it's because of the work that I do, it's trying to find the solutions. We found solutions through basically, a roundabout way through discussion. And I suppose the difference in my experience to now is it was less structured than it is now. It was less structured. So you kind of got into these spirals of conversation that led to that creativity. And I think to the earlier, I think it was Emily was saying that, when you're not together in a room, that doesn't happen. And I think that's the challenge. And because regardless of the structure that you have when you're sitting in the room together nowadays in PPI, which is incredibly important because we need to, we need to get these answers. It's the sidebar conversations. It's the little things that you start to learn about each other that you find a way to help. And that's the biggest challenge, I think, moving forward. But I can't, I've learned, I'm a layperson. I wouldn't have known as much as I do now without having those conversations. It's been incredibly important. To deliver that back then to our community. So that's my experience.
Thanks, Avril. We've had a really interesting question come in from Tim Manning. Tim, I don't know if you're willing to ask the question out loud rather than me read it out. I think it's a really interesting one. Martha, can we facilitate that?
Yeah, if Tim would like to unmute his microphone, absolutely, he can.
Okay, I'm here. I'm just about to be involved. Thank you for including my question. I'm just about to be involved in an advisory group for research which could potentially have a long-term impact on care for the elderly in Ireland. My worry is, though, that even though the research is really well funded, and I'm really keen to be involved in it, it's well targeted, that my participation in the end ends up as a kind of lipstick and gloss and justification for what will ultimately be watered down government inaction. And then I can end up being kind of smeared over something which doesn't deliver.
And can you just give us a quick rundown on like, have you been involved in research before?
No, this is my first time. I'm
okay.
An advisory group virgin.
Okay, and that's a great point that you've brought up. Anybody like to say a few words on that, or anybody in our generally in the room want to say a few words on that?
I think I could probably have a quick go with that, and it's that a lot of the time, working in the public advisory panel, we come across when we're kind of looking at different PPI projects or research proposals. We like to talk about how PPI isn't a matter of ticking a box. It's not something that can be, used in this one particular part of the research and then never consult the patient again. It has to be kind of it's methodological. It's a constant referral to patients and care, and I think that it is I think it's a valid worry to kind of consider. Well, is my involvement only kind of a for show? And I think it's something worth probably something worth bringing up with whoever's kind of managing the research to say, like, I want to ensure that what I'm contributing to your research is being used in the most beneficial way and is true PPI as opposed to that ticking a box.
Yeah,
definitely. And I think, Tim, as well, it's about constant follow-up to make sure that you're kept in touch with everything that's going on. I'm awful for that, and anybody I've worked with here will probably know that I constantly keep in contact, sending emails or texts to see what's happening, how's it moving along, how can I contribute more, and to make sure that your voice is heard, because Tim, your voice is just as important as anybody else in that room. But I can understand those fears, and Fiona has just put into the chat that it's an understandable concern. We all hope as researchers that our work will have direct impact on government policy and try to develop relationships and target our outputs to ensure that happens. PPI involvement can really help maximise impact on policy. However, there are lots of other influences on the policy making process, and we have to recognise that research evidence is just one aspect that feeds into policy. So thanks, Fiona, for that comment. And Tim, there's some great experts on here who would only be too happy to speak to you offline. If you want to make contact with any of them, and let us know how it goes. We'd be all interested to find out.
absolutely. So I'm just looking at our time, and I'm going to move on, Wendy, if that's okay, just to the last couple of areas we wanted to cover. And that was really to ask the panel whether or not they have any advice. So advice on two fronts, really. Advice for members of the public or patients who want to get involved in PPI. And the other people we're asking for your advice for is researchers who want to get involved in PPI. So we might start with the members of the public or patients who want to get involved. Would you have any advice from your experience of being involved for them? Does anyone want to take that question?
I'd be happy to chime in on that one.
Thanks so much.
Sure. I think for me, what I've learned is that no one person has the answers to everything. And even though you may not realize that you have a perspective that's important, you may have absolutely no experience in an area. And I feel like for me, that was especially poignant. I didn't have a condition that I was advocating for. I didn't have a specific area that I was knowledgeable in. I'm not in the healthcare industry at all in my work normally, but I always found ways to ask questions that maybe I didn't understand, and that could spark a conversation. Or I had so a memory of something with my mother-in-law, perhaps, that ended up being, making an impact on a conversation. So I would always say to everyone, all of our perspectives, for one reason or another, because of our life experience, we have something to offer no matter what the topic is.
Yeah, Teresa, thanks so much. And it's lovely to hear that voice, because it is public and patient involvement. You don't have to be living with any kind of healthcare condition or even caring for someone with a healthcare condition to be involved in this type of work. And as Wendy was saying there to Tim, your voice is equally valid and valuable around that research table. I'm just reading a comment here from Robert, who spoke this morning so eloquently. And Robert is saying, don't be afraid to share your experience. So that, you know, that's good advice for any members of the public to get involved. I'm wondering, Emily, you mentioned that you had a friend who kind of introduced you initially, and I'm wondering, is that something that, you know, is a help to get involved if you know someone who's already involved, or what would you think about that?
I think it's definitely helpful because it can be daunting for anyone to go into a room and they don't know anyone, and then to start giving their opinion or their experience about certain things. That it's definitely easier if you know someone going into that.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, a bring a friend evening is a great way to recruit more people, or
Yeah.
even if you are starting a PPI, to invite people, your demographic, to bring someone with them. That
Yeah.
is probably a very good way to bring people in until they're a bit more confident to come in by themselves.
Okay.
And then, you know, it's also important to remind people that they don't have to go to every session. Like Jack was saying, that
Yeah.
student or a young person, kind of, if you have exams or you have work or things that prohibit you from attending, it doesn't mean that, you know, that's the end of it. That, you know, you can come and go as you please, and then other people have their own levels of commitment, and you can only do what you can do.
Yeah.
I think that's very important to reassure people with.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Ruth, I'm going to skip back to a question quickly because I know we're running out of time, and it's a really good one. So this is from Deirdre Fitzgerald. I'm a researcher, although I see huge value in embedding PPI at grant application stage. I struggle with asking patients to commit time and energy to something that may not be funded, and they may be disappointed. Also, do the panel feel that conversations about payment or expenses should take place from the start? I've had some patients who are horrified at this suggestion.
Very interesting question, Wendy. Yeah. Does anybody want to take that, Avril? Yeah.
Yeah, it's hugely variable. I mean, I think the reality for the researchers is patients just, I mean, if they have to travel, you know, distances or whatever, there's reimbursement offered. I think it's about having the conversation up front. It may be awkward, but just ask, you know, I mean, it's all in the way it's asked, you know, and I think it's all down to the, you know, I think one of the panelists mentioned it earlier, you know, if you lay out very clearly what's expected of the patient or the person or the public, you know, the member of the public from the outset, then, you know, you can't be blamed for asking the question. You're just asking what is a very reasonable question really at the end of the day. And I think that's a critical piece all the way through PPI is, you know, don't be afraid to ask. You know, it's instead of getting stressed out about it, it's just all in how that's done. And people do get horrified when you mention money in these situations, but then other people are horrified to think that you don't.
Yeah.
So
yeah, so that's good advice for people interested in becoming PPI contributors, Avril, but also for researchers who maybe aren't are getting into this area of public and patient involvement and want to know, you know, what's the best way to approach it, and I'm sure don't want to approach it in that kind of tokenistic way that Tim was talking about earlier, where things will be glossed over or not contributing to the final outcome of the research or whatever.
But it's also as well, you know, it's important, you know, you're going to be building, as a scientist, you are going to be building a relationship with these people where, you know, difficult questions may need to be asked. And it's starting as you mean to go on really, you know, but it's in the way it's done. And that's really what's important, because, you know, the questions that will be asked will be personal, you know, they'll be challenging sometimes. And so it's developing the relationship from the minute that initial communication starts is very, very important.
Yeah, that kind of resonates with what Jack was saying earlier around, you know, the facilitation within the group and communication and, you know, setting out those roles and expectations. And I'm also thinking about something Emily was saying, and Teresa around, and you yourself, Avril, around those sidebar conversations and around that kind of relationship building piece, which is such an important component in PPI, you know, and that with the online we're missing out a bit on that. You know, the cup of tea and the scone, and in my experience of working with people in PPI groups, is so important, more important often, you know, than actually sometimes what comes out at the end, because you've built the relationships, people feel valued, they feel comfortable, and, you know, that's really, really critical. There's a question there about, sorry, it was further up there now, Wendy, I don't know if you saw it, but it was about a guide. And I'm wondering, is that a guide for researchers from the person who asked the question, or is it a guide for PPI contributors?
I was going to bring in Hannah if Martha would allow her to speak, because I've worked with Hannah and she is just amazing at involving PPI. And I'm wondering from her point of view, if she'd like to give a few points on what we've discussed.
Yeah, of course. Hannah, can you unmute your microphone?
Hey, hi everyone. Just I suppose the main thing I'd like to say is thank you to all the speakers in this session and the chairs as well. You know, I think that, you know, this conference it's one of my favorite events every year, and I always come away learning something new. Even though, you know, I've been involved in PPI for a number of years now, listening to PPI contributors with different backgrounds and different kinds of involvement with lots of different projects, that's the best learning for me, as well as, you know, the practical hands-on experience. You know, I've worked with Wendy on a previous project related to juvenile arthritis, and, you know, there's been lots of different challenges in that I think we've been able to address really well together, because Wendy's been such a collaborative member of our research team. You know, she's at all of our steering group meetings. She's probably one of the most involved, you know, when you consider all the different academic partners that we have. You know, Wendy's definitely, you know, somebody that I would consider as one of the—
Don't talk about me. This isn't don't talk about me.
I know,
no.
but
I'm interested how your new group now that you're doing online with Precious, and how, because you've never actually met in person.
We've never met in person, so that was an interesting challenge, I think, to try and set up the group and try and mimic that, you know, as you know, you've kind of mentioned the tea and the scone at the start, to kind of get to know each other as people and not just as researchers and patient partners, but, you know, get that sort of you know, that friendly sort of relationship that can be really important and contribute to that culture of openness and being able to raise different points with the whole group. So that was really challenging. I suppose one of the things that we do is we do have that 15 minutes before our meeting to have tea and coffee and just have a chat before we get into the work of it.
Yeah.
And I think that's been really nice. We also—
And Hannah, just to ask too, because a lot of people are asking on the chat, how have you reached out as the researcher and found these PPI contributions, especially now over the last year?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an interesting setup. So our group contributes to two projects in parallel. So one that I lead and one that's led by Dr. Una Mead, who's chairing another session actually at the moment. So Una really reached out to a bunch of different groups within our university, as well as community organizations. So through the Students' Union, for example, through the University of Sanctuary, because we were looking for very much a public group. So they're not a group with a particular condition, for example, and we're looking for kind of general public. So trying to reach out to a number of different organizations to make sure that our group was as diverse as possible was really important. As well as going through PPI Ignite. So there were a number of people who had expressed an interest in becoming involved in different PPI opportunities. So that's been really helpful for us, and we've ended up with a really diverse group that way.
And I think, Hannah, this combination, this come together of all the PPI Ignite groups that Adele is heading up is going to make a huge difference in PPI in Ireland. So thank you for taking the time to give those bit of feedback. I hope I didn't put you on the spot.
Not at all, Wendy. Thank you.
I'm looking at a question there that came in the chat from Laura, and it was about a guide. Laura, do you want to unmute your mic and just ask that question? You know, was it for researchers, or were you thinking about PPI contributors?
Hi, I was really thinking of patients, because it seems to me over the talks today that that's the hardest cohort to engage, you know, the needs of the patients and their voice. So there was a guide, so people would know what to expect, know the lay of the land before they got involved. That might improve numbers, because people do obviously people want to be involved. It's just knowing what is involved would help.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. And I think it comes back to what Jack was saying earlier in his experience with the public advisory panel and the Ignite public advisory panel around setting out the facilitators working with the group to set out those roles and expectations at the start, you know, and that's going to be different, Laura, for different groups. So I think it's about creating that participatory space, if you like, where you can co-create those ideas around roles and expectations. Like, for example, very practical things around how often are we going to meet? How long are the meetings going to be? If they're face-to-face meetings, where am I going to be able to park my car or lock my bicycle if I'm cycling, or whatever, very practical things. If I am a wheelchair user, are there toilets on the ground floor that are accessible?
Yeah.
So I think all of these things are really important issues, and they need to be discussed in the group, and you agree almost your terms of reference for your group together. Avril, you're nodding there. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes, I think there's, it's important that there's guidance for both. And I think you make a good point insofar as that there's a lot of variability here. It's very different, being involved in working with scientists at a very basic level from a medical perspective when you're a layperson, and sometimes that can be very intimidating, but really you're the expert on your condition. So you have the ability, and that should be explained, and then for researchers themselves, it was brought up earlier, how do they engage with patients? What's appropriate to ask? Especially initially, when maybe you haven't done this before, where a scientist or clinician understands, the need for this and really values the process, but is a little bit worried about, causing offense or anything like that, maybe unnecessarily. So the guidelines are needed, but I think they're there, and I think there's a lot of guidelines out there, and again, there's so much good stuff. Certainly in Ireland, because in my experience, I work internationally, I'm based here, but I work internationally, we're streets ahead of other countries when it comes to PPI, and we should be very proud of that.
Yeah, definitely.
I use a lot of the guidelines that have been developed here in Ireland to support international organizations. So, we have it here. It's about really pulling it into the right area for the right particular purpose is there, instead of having to reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely.
Important, and for I know organizations are involved here today, that can really benefit from the input from groups that you guys are involved with, because that's where we take our.
Yeah, and Robert spoke earlier on about the UPASI course, and I just didn't feel I had the time to do that, but I did do the IPOSI patient education program, and I definitely think that really benefited me, and gave me that little bit of a step up that I needed. Because sometimes you can get involved in your own little world, and for me it's obviously rheumatology, but I wanted to have a broader perspective on PPI, and I think the IPOSI patient education program did that for me.
Yeah,
Ruth, we're nearly out of time.
We're nearly there, and I think and to be honest as well, I suppose just in my experience of working with people with communication disabilities like aphasia, which means that the people have problems with comprehension, understanding what you're saying, getting the words they want to be able to talk, with reading, with writing, with spelling. All of these areas are challenging for that group of people. And yet I would absolutely say to you that we have worked very successfully together as co-researchers. And the way that we've done that is we've created space to say, well, what works for you in terms of being able to access this research process? And we've co-designed and co-created accessible research processes. And from a researcher's point of view, it takes a lot more time. It takes a lot more effort. It absolutely takes you letting go of control of the process and being open to what your PPI contributors and co-researchers are saying to you, but it is so worth it. And I would say to you that if there's anyone listening, if I really believe that if we can do that work successfully, and work collaboratively with people with aphasia and communication impairment, then there is no group that can't be involved, you know, in this type of collaborative, co-designed research. You know, absolutely, I think that. And we've had we've just co-authored a paper with 2 people with aphasia, and those people have written top tips for researchers from their perspective as people with, you know, communication disability. What do you need to do as a researcher in your PPI process to make it accessible to me? And like, even reading it, it was fantastic. So, you know, I really think that this process is open to everyone who wants to be involved. Yeah.
Well, I'll just finish up by saying thank you to all our panelists. You've all been amazing. And I wish you the best of luck in your future, and please stay connected. I think we will be speaking to Martha and definitely Edel, because I think what we've seen today is there is an appetite for sessions like this, and we definitely need some ongoing webinars to make people, especially like Tim, feel part of something bigger and feel supported. Yeah. I think that's really, really important. I know I needed that at the beginning. So everybody, thanks for your time today. And Martha, I'll hand to you. I haven't got the agenda in front of me, so I'm not sure what we're breaking for or what next.
Thanks to everybody for participating and for all the chat.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Ruth and Wendy, for a superb job chairing that session, and to Teresa, Precious, Avril, Jack and Emily for joining us. So we're heading into a 15-minute break now. So if you could all join us back here at 12:30, we'll be kicking off again. So a 15-minute break, will be starting again at 12:30. Thanks very much, everyone. Well, thanks very much, everyone. We're going to kick back off. I hope you enjoyed your coffee break, and apologies we didn't virtually deliver any coffees or scones. So up next is Nicolette Warner. So Nicolette is a PhD candidate in the School of Psychology in NUI Galway, and Nicolette's research explores the experiences of people with BRCA alteration within the Irish healthcare system. Nikki recently won the inaugural PPI Ignite at NUI Galway Award for PPI Excellence for the PPI embedded within her PhD. Nicolette is also a peer supporter for individuals with BRCA associated with the Marie Keating Foundation. So I'm going to introduce Nikki now, and off we go with her presentation.
Hi, my name is Nicolette Warner. I'm here to talk about my PhD and how I've incorporated PPI into my PhD. I'm funded by the Irish Research Council. I'm delighted to be discussing creating PPI as a normal thing within research. I think as an early career researcher, as a PhD, that it really is a vital part of my research, and I think it really adds a valuable aspect to what I do. I think this is something that in certain instances would be useful to incorporate at an even earlier stage. For example, I'm currently working with an undergraduate student within the School of Psychology, Christina Gleeson, with my supervisor, Professor Groark. And we're working with Lynch Syndrome Ireland with Pat Fahey and Roberta Horgan. And they are our PPI panel for this research project, looking at individuals with a Lynch syndrome in Ireland, Lynch syndrome diagnosis, in Ireland. And I think it's a really important thing that we have their voice even at an early stage for Christina's research. So I think PPI hopefully will become more widespread, and hopefully we'll be able to get better at making sure that it's meaningful and not just a tokenistic thing that we include. So before we begin, I thought I'd briefly explain what a BRCA alteration is, as you'll hear me referencing it throughout. So everyone has a BRCA1 and a BRCA2 gene, and these act primarily as tumor suppressors, which means they actually help in preventing cancer and preventing tumorous growth. However, when you hear an individual say that they have BRCA or they have a BRCA alteration or mutation, they're referring to a change in their gene. And that change in their gene increases lifetime risk of developing certain cancers. And you can see the exact percentage risks along the bottom of the slide there. So having a BRCA1 or BRCA2 alteration for females, that'll increase their risk of ovarian cancer, for males prostate, and then for both sexes, there's an increased risk in breast, pancreatic, and melanoma cancers. With that being said, the risk is much higher in females for breast and ovarian cancer. So it's usually females who will have to undergo preventative measures or take up a really intensive screening schedule to try and mitigate that cancer risk. So women will often undergo a bilateral prophylactic mastectomy, which refers to the removal of both breasts and associated tissues, and there are lots of options around what type of surgery to get and whether or not to undergo reconstruction, and there's a lot of decision making around that also. Females will also often be advised to undergo a salpingo-oophorectomy to mitigate ovarian cancer risk, and that refers to the removal of both fallopian tubes and ovaries. When that is undertaken, that'll also put the individual into early onset menopause, and that'll with it come risks to cognitive health, bone health, and cardiovascular health, and so on. It'll also obviously put a direct stop to any options for having a natural pregnancy. So there are a lot of options that females who are identified as having a BRCA1 alteration have to work through. Males may be advised to undergo more advanced prostate screening schedules, and possibly pancreatic, dependent on family history. So this PhD aims to explore the experiences of individuals with a BRCA1 or 2 BRCA1 and 2 alteration within the Irish healthcare system, and we're looking to develop an intervention to assist with this population's needs. So thus far, we have conducted a systematic review on the psychosocial interventions that have been conducted in this population, and that should be published in the Journal of Genetic Counselling in the coming weeks. And we've also conducted qualitative interviews with 18 people who have a BRCA1 or 2 alteration, looking at their experience and looking at the unmet needs that they have also within the Irish healthcare system. And we're hoping that these 2 studies now are going to provide to form the backbone of the intervention that we're designing. And we've already, from these findings, discussed that it will take a psychoeducational focus and will look at providing individuals with educational and informational needs about navigating the Irish healthcare system. So the PPI aspect to it. So this PhD is one of the first projects of its kind in the Republic of Ireland, looking at the psychological aspect of a hereditary cancer condition. It was quite hard to know, therefore, with the existing literature, how pertinent that was or how relevant that was to the Irish setting. So we thought it was really extra important to have a patient voice within that, to make sure that we kind of encapsulate their experiences when looking at this. So I do have a great PPI panel, but they will stay anonymous. And that's because, as I mentioned before, it's a hereditary cancer condition. So anyone with a BRCA1 or 2 alteration has a 50-50 chance of passing that on to their children. So the impact is widespread. It's not just the individual impacted by it. So when we look at immediate family, some of my PPI panel members have children who aren't yet aware of their genetic status. There's also extended family members who are still undergoing testing, and that can be quite a stressful process. And individuals can often have fears around insurance or just about their own genetic information being out in the public. So for that reason, my panels stay anonymous. And I think it's an important thing to consider before you go out to try and pick your PPI panel or try and get a PPI panel, is just to make sure to provide that option that if they want to stay anonymous, that they can. So in regards to the project, and I suppose an important element to this project is that the inspiration from it, to boil it down, came from my mother passing away in 2015, the summer before I started the final year of my undergraduate in NUI Galway. She died following 3 separate run-ins with breast cancer. She died in her early 50s. And we found out just before her death that that was actually linked to a BRCA1 alteration, which, alongside the love of horses, she passed on to me. So I myself have a BRCA1 alteration. So obviously I have my own preconceived, or not even preconceived, I have my own experiences with that. But they're not necessarily representative of how the overall Irish BRCA population feel. Because of my age, I'm not yet in the cancer screening schedule. I also have actually quite a limited family history due to the past generations on my mother's side being quite small, and also a lot of them being male. So I was aware of my own biases and that I probably wasn't the most representative BRCA patient, for want of a better word. And I then thought that it was extra important that I got a PPI panel to make sure that what I was doing was actually conducive to being what the population itself wants. So PPI input is therefore very important for my project, and they fed back on so many things, but kind of pulled 3. The first one is we'd have a lot of discussion around language and so on, and the term mutation, which you might be more familiar with when it comes to BRCA alterations. There are some negative connotations around that term, and it wouldn't be a favorable one. So instead, when presenting or when using, when writing or disseminating, I stick to BRCA alteration or a pathogenic variant in the BRCA1 or 2 gene. Secondly, the intervention design. So there are quite a few, but not actually that many, if that makes sense, individuals with a BRCA1 or 2 alteration in Ireland, and they're quite widespread. So they're all over the country. So we wanted to make sure that whatever comes of this project can actually help as many people as possible. So it was important for us that it was accessible. And for it to be accessible in that manner, it has to be an online format to ensure that anyone can access it. So that's where they fed in regard to the design of the intervention itself. When we talk about population, so I suppose, as I've kind of discussed, females are perhaps in one way impacted a bit more heavily than males would be with a BRCA alteration. But with that being said, the PPI panel did point out that males are often omitted from the conversation when it comes to research around BRCA, and that it's important to get their voice in it too. So it was from those discussions that I decided to expand for my qualitative research to include males in the actual interviews also, which initially I hadn't done. So it was from discussions with them that I changed that. So in regards to the structure, like I said, we're quite informal. We all know each other quite well and we'd be very friendly. So it does work in that way. We are informal in how we operate. We also have BRCA holidays. So this is where if an individual is kind of fed up of talking about BRCA or has a lot going on and just isn't able to take on anything, they can let me know that they're on their holidays, and I won't send on any content to them then. And that just allows for them only to take on as much work as they feel comfortable with. I do try to provide something back in whatever way I can. So I do try to send on any information that's relevant to the BRCA 1 or 2 alteration in Ireland when I can. So I send on any articles, any findings, any events, and so on. And I also try to give back where I can, kind of one-on-one. So with one of the members, I helped her write an application for a bursary to attend a conference as a patient advocate, and also helped her navigate the system to upload that application, as it was through the grant system, and that can be quite a complicated system if you're not used to using it within academia. So I was able to help in that way. So even though I'm not in a position to provide financial reimbursement, I do try to give back in other ways. Obviously with COVID, we can't meet face to face. So now it's all online. And the way we operate this is that we have a WhatsApp group, and I will kind of let the group know that I'm looking for feedback, and whoever is available will text me back and say that they're happy for feedback or they're happy for anything to be sent on to them. And then they provide feedback in different ways. So some of them might send me a voice note, some might give me a phone call, some might email me back. So I think it's really important to allow for individual preferences in that regard and to be flexible, which is a skill that is important in any PhD, I think. So I do want to say thank you to my amazing PPI panel. They really are so supportive and motivate me to get this over the line. And I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Nikki. Thanks for sharing that presentation with you. Really insightful, and also for sharing your personal experience with BRCA with us during that presentation. It really strikes me, Nikki, how you have such an innovative and flexible way of dealing with your PPI panel, even in terms of being a confidential panel, or the idea of a BRCA holiday. It's so useful for people to have that flexibility. And I just wonder, would you have any advice for any researchers or PPI contributors in terms of flexibility and how to deal with that? Do you initiate these creative ideas, or does it come from the group?
So I suppose, to answer your question, I think it depends on where you are within your research. So if you're a PhD who might not have that much funding behind you, that kind of thing, I think the best thing to do is to be honest with your PPI panel and let them figure out what works best for them. So we'd have quite honest discussions, and I don't think I explicitly mentioned in the presentation, but I don't have funding to provide reimbursement financially, but I try to give back in other ways. But I think if you're honest from the start, and your PPI panel, I mean, mine are a great group, and they come up with the solutions themselves, and we work together. And like I was saying about being flexible, one of the PPI panel members would work quite late night shifts, and like I've taken phone calls at 9 or 10, and obviously I'm in the position to do that, so I'm lucky in that regard. But I just think if at the start, when you're setting out and trying to set up your PPI panel, to just be flexible and to let them know what you can provide, and to know what you want, what you kind of not expect from them, but what you'd like to get back from them. And just to be honest with the resources that you have, and the timelines and the aims of the project, and so on.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nikki. Well, it seems to be really working and very beneficial for all parties involved. So well done. And I suppose another angle that I'd like to delve in a bit on is the challenges of embedding PPI in a PhD. I can only imagine that there are so many balls in the air when you are doing a PhD, and there's so many stakeholders, and you have your GRC committee and your supervisors. There's so much going on, and bringing in another element, I'm sure it does come with its challenges, but solutions as well. I'm sure you.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there's so many things going on with the PhD, so it's a lot to navigate. But I just think, again, with that flexibility, if your panel might know that you're busy at a certain time, and then they'll know that you're busy, and they'll know what you can provide to them and what you can provide back. But also, I think we might have this kind of preconceived idea in our head about what perfect PPI is. And I suppose I kind of think that once you are getting a meaningful input, it doesn't really matter the exact means that you get that. So like that with the WhatsApp notes, like so many of my pointers from my PPI panel, they might just come from kind of more casual conversations that we'll have, and then I'll be able to incorporate that in my research because it's in the back of my mind. And obviously having a personal part in it, I can kind of figure out what it all means in context and that kind of thing. So I do think there might be a bit of there might be a strict idea as to what PPI is. And I think for larger scale projects, obviously that's great to be able to follow that. But for people who are doing their PhDs, and even like I mentioned at the start, like we have an undergraduate project with Lynch Syndrome Ireland, and we've done lots of PPI with them, and just being able to be flexible, and that it doesn't always have to be this big scary formal thing. It can just be more of a casual thing. And if you're willing to kind of get down and talk to the group you're working with, that can work as well, rather than having a big kind of scary monthly meeting. It can be more of a casual thing if you are working with fewer resources and on a smaller timescale.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Nikki. So that's all we have time for, but I know there's a lot of questions in the chat. So if Nikki, if you want to get back to any of them, but we're going to head on to our next presentation. But thanks very much, Nikki. That was absolutely fantastic. So now I'm delighted to introduce Nan McCarran, Dr. John Morris, Katie Baxter, and John McCusker, who are members of the My Comrade Plus PPI group. I'd also like to introduce Colette Kerwin, who is the research team member with the My Comrade Plus study that was involved in this presentation. So this is a PPI partnership that ensures the perspectives of living with multimorbidities are heard and reflected in the development and dissemination of this cross-border trial. The My Comrade Plus PPI group and study were also a joint winner of the PPI in Excellence Awards at NUI Galway. So thanks very much to everyone for recording this presentation, and we will head into it now.
Good afternoon. My name is Nan. Thank you to the PPI Conference Committee for inviting us, the My Comrade PPI panel, to speak today at this important conference about our involvement with the My Comrade study. I'd like to take this opportunity on behalf of the group to say thank you to NUIG Public Advisory Panel and NUIG Ignite for our PPI Excellence in Research Award earlier this year, and to Kyton, who support the My Comrade study. I'll open this presentation with a brief overview of the My Comrade study and highlight the aim of our PPI panel. Morris will present on the setup of our group, Katie on our activities to date, and John on our challenges and learnings. But first, I'd like to share with you a little slice of my own story. I have been living with multimorbidity and polypharmacy for nearly 23 years, starting with a bone marrow transplant in 1998. I survived a hemoglobin of 2 in 2003, which I understood to be pretty unique. On the positive side, without all the brilliant medics and support staff in London, Scotland, and Northern Ireland hospitals, I would not be here today. On the other side of this coin, I have been on the receiving end of appointment errors, a lack of communication, GP prescription errors, pharmacy discrepancies, and many more. In 2003, one of my early hospital files went missing and was never recovered. Over the years, I've developed a good knowledge of my complex medical history, and through necessity, I have become my own healthcare manager, at times bridging the communication gap between consultants. I was very happy to join the My Comrade PPI panel because it was very relevant to me and has given me a voice that would otherwise not be heard. The My Comrade study is a pilot cluster randomised controlled trial that examines the effect of an intervention that supports GPs and practice-based pharmacists in their review and management of multiple medications prescribed for patients with multimorbidities. It is a cross-border study between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The core purpose of our PPI partnership with the My Comrade study was to ensure that the perspectives of persons living with multimorbidities and polypharmacy were heard and reflected in the development and the sharing of the study. Our broader ambition is to positively and effectively impact healthcare policies for people living with multimorbidities on the island of Ireland and hopefully beyond our borders too. Our PPI panel has found the My Comrade research team to be very professional, personable, and easy to work with, which effectively sets the stage for us to play our part. Thank you. I'd like to hand you over now to Dr. Morris Brown.
Thank you, Nan. My name is Dr. Morris Brown. I've been a GP for over 20 years, and after leaving my practice in Castlederg, I worked as medical advisor at the Western Health and Social Services Board, where I was responsible for primary care in the area, including GP prescribing. These two occupations give me a knowledge and background into research, and I was interested in being involved in the My Comrade Plus study and keen to help in any way I could. In addition, I am living with multiple long-term medical conditions, and I'm taking more than 10 medications per day. Involvement with the My Comrade Plus study so far has been a great experience for me. I have found it very interesting and have been able to increase my knowledge of modern research techniques. Since March 2020, I've been unable to socialize face-to-face in the normal way, and our frequent Zoom meetings with our group of knowledgeable, pleasant, and respectful members have gone some way to filling this gap. I now wish to describe our PPI partnership with the My Comrade Plus study. My initial contact in late 2019 with the My Comrade Plus Research Associate, Colette, was initiated through John McCusker, Secretary of the Rotary Club of Strabane, Lifford, who later also became a member of the group. The club has members from both sides of the border. After discussion at a club meeting, it was agreed that I, Dr. Morris Brown, would be the best person in the club to take this forward. I first met with Colette in Lifford on the 16th of January 2020, and she explained the details of the study and the part a PPI partnership would play in it. I then, with Colette's assistance, managed to get a group of 4 established. Our 4 members, 2 females, Nan and Katie, and 2 males, John and myself, as cross-border representatives, have substantial experience of life, have direct or indirect contact, exposure, or experience to living with multiple long-term health conditions and prescribed multiple medications. The first meeting of our full member group planned for the 18th of March 2020 infamously coincided with the initial COVID lockdown. This meeting and all subsequent meetings were conducted virtually via Zoom, and communication between the researchers and the PPI partnership was by email. This means of communication proved to be very successful and allowed us together to establish a great deal in a short period of time. My ambition for the study is that the findings of this research should be shared extensively with GPs, pharmacists, and hospital consultants through their various journals and ongoing education programs to improve the care of patients with multiple long-term medical conditions and taking many different medications. Thank you, and I now hand over to Katie.
Thanks, Morris. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie, and I've worked in a number of roles in a GP practice in Northern Ireland for 40 years. And most recently, prior to my retirement, I was practice and finance manager. When invited to take part in this My Comrade Plus PPI group, I was very interested, especially as I felt my work experience had relevance to the area of study, an area which had the potential for improvement in patient care. I would like to give you an insight into our PPI panel involvement with the My Comrade research team. Our involvement to date has mainly related to giving our perspective and advising the research team with regard to 1, the interview invite letter for patient participants, 2, the interview questions, and 3, the initial analytical framework from the interview transcripts. With the invite letter, we recommended changes of some of the wording to improve clarity and reduce any confusion and alleviate potential anxiety. We also recommended including participants' GP details, which we believed would encourage patients to seek further reassurance from someone they trusted, should they wish to. Again, with the interview questions, we recommended changes in the wording to improve clarity. We also gave our recommendations on prioritising and ordering of the questions and exclusion of those we thought to be less relevant. Because of COVID-19, we also suggested the inclusion of some questions around the impact of the pandemic on patients and their access to care. Finally, we contributed to developing the initial, what was called the analytical framework in interpreting the interviews. Following a training session on Zoom, each of us was involved separately in reading an interview, identifying what we thought were the key points the participant was saying and adding a description to it. Afterwards, we came together as a group with the My Comrade research team to discuss and agree on what each of us thought. We finished with an agreed list of key points and descriptions. This process was very new to all members of the group, and therefore we relied greatly on our research team, Lisa and Colette, for guidance. At our last Zoom meeting, Colette brought us up to date with the coding process. The group's next contribution is to discuss the dissemination of the study findings, that is, what to share, how to do that, and with whom it is to be shared. This study has been most interesting and purposeful, and I certainly have enjoyed and benefited from being part of it. John will now tell us of some of the challenges we faced. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. As Katie said, my name is John McCosker. I am a person passionate about giving service and have always been drawn to support organisations that give service to the community. Numbered among these were Roundtable, the Northern Ireland Fire Authority, Department of Health and Social Services Appeal Tribunal, and Rotary. The ethos of Roundtable and Rotary is service above self. This ethos was also implicit in the other two organisations, which were voluntary and unpaid. My personal health problems and relationships with GPs and consultants encouraged my involvement as a member of the My Comrade Study PPI panel. This experience has given me the realisation there can be better explanation to patients by their GPs of medical diagnosis, medications prescribed, and their effects. I myself resorted to self-management of my own conditions from my interpretation of GPs and consultants' discussions and comments. My experience highlighted to me the need for patients to have a clearer understanding and regular review of their medical conditions and explanations of medication and treatment prescribed by consultants and particularly by GPs, all of which seem to relate to the purpose of the My Comrade Plus study. I am presenting here today on the strengths and challenges as we as a group experience from being part of the My Comrade Plus PPI panel. Key strengths and motivators were the relevance and variance of the personal, occupational background and life experiences of every member of the team contributed immensely to the substance of the study. Being part of a group of people who were also of a similar mind and were willing to listen as well as give their opinion. Being part of a team where the participants had mutual respect and dominance was absent that encouraged full inclusivity. Support, assistance and leadership from the My Comrade Plus research team was invaluable. The ability of the whole team to adapt to the new norm of collaborating via Zoom meetings because of COVID. The challenges in the study Involvement as a member of a PPI panel for the first time for any study is daunting. My professional life has been very practical and always required purpose and strategy to be clearly defined. Once getting to grips with the purpose of the My Comrade Plus study and the purpose of our PPI group, the strategy for engagement emerged, giving sight of a pathway to making a meaningful contribution to the study. In particular, coding the interview was challenging. At first, the coding of the interviews for My Comrade study was an unusual experience, and it required specific focus, interpretation, and concentration. The need to remain objective and confine interpretation to the sentiments of the patients in their interviews required skills that were vital to the exercise. The positive feedback we received from the My Comrade Plus study team indicated we accomplished this task well. Our other most prominent challenge was engaging with and working remotely. Working remotely due to COVID-19 without face-to-face consultations with the entire group and the My Comrade research team seemed somewhat abstract at the beginning. There was a need to realise that despite having to rely on Zoom and email, this was a real-world exercise to remain focused on our objective and to manage it. In conclusion, I feel I need to congratulate the members of the My Comrade Plus research team who led our group in the exercises throughout the study and in the formulation of the outcomes, and they are Colette Kirwan, Emma Carr, Lisa Hines, and Andrew Murphy, PPA of My Comrade Plus study. Our group thanks you for your courtesy, assistance, and the pleasure of your company on this study. Also, as highlighted by Nan at the opening of the presentation, our thanks to Kaiton for their funding and to NUIG Ignite for our award, and to NUIG PPI Conference Committee for inviting us to speak here today. On behalf of the entire group, I thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Nan, Katie, Morris, John, and Colette for that superb presentation and overview of the study and the PPI embedded within the My Comrade study. Really interesting. So I know Nan, Morris, John, Colette, and Katie are all here with us today. So I'm going to throw out a question, and whoever would like to answer, please do so. So it's really interesting to see how Colette had done some work by trying to build up this group and was in contact with Morris. And then for your first meeting, COVID had struck. Although you have only ever met online and virtually, you seem to have built a real relationship and a really good working relationship, the PPI panel and also the researchers involved. And I would just love if you had any tips for members joining new PPI groups or for researchers setting up PPI groups on how to build that relationship when you are in a virtual world, and how for people to get to know each other and know how we work or how we like to work. If anyone would like to come in there.
Hello, John McCosker here.
Brilliant, John. Thanks very
much.
much.
Can you hear me? I suppose everyone's a little shy, but I think, so far as I'm concerned, it was a help to have friends and associates that I was familiar with, especially Dr. Morris Brown. So having had that to help me, the exercise was a heck of a lot easier. But I'd be interested to hear what Nan and Katie have to say, and Morris as well. So maybe I could invite them to say a few words.
Great, thanks, John. Nan, I see you have your hand raised there. Would you like to come in?
Hello, yes, thank you. I think the reason that we had such a good community spirit within the four of us was because we were led very well by the NUIG research team, Colette and Lisa, and it was a wonderful experience, and it made it easy for us to be able to communicate and talk freely. And we couldn't have done it really without being guided. And I suppose the information we were all giving from our experience helped the researchers too. We get on very well together, and it would have been nice had we been able to meet up together. I think it would have made quite a difference. I like the idea that Nikki talked about earlier about having WhatsApp feedback. It just makes it easier to feedback, and that's it really. Yeah, we had a great time, and we all enjoyed giving. We all came from different backgrounds and experiences, and I think we just loved talking about what we could talk about. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Nan. And I suppose that leads in nicely with the question we've come in here in our chat. So, were there any challenges in capturing the PPI voice in a cross-border context?
Can I come in there?
Yeah, please, Dr. Morris. That's brilliant.
Let's see. Can I bring my face up? Yeah, that's it. Can I say just at the onset before I answer that question? It has been a pleasure and indeed a privilege for me personally to be a small part of this conference, along with so many experts in various fields. I've learned so much more about PPI. But the one thing I would like to say, when Colette met with me twice before, we had a meet on Zoom. We talked about forming a PPI panel. I very soon realized that a panel was the wrong word. And from then on, I talked about a partnership. And I think one of the most important things was the partnership that the four members of the previous panel had with the researchers. And I think that is one of the key issues. If you don't have the respect of the researchers and the fact that they listen to you and take on board what you say, I think that is very important. You mentioned about the cross-border aspect. Strabane Lifford Rotary Club is one of the few Rotary clubs in the world, believe it or not, that have members from 2 different countries. So there was that aspect there, and Colette was able to bring in Nan, who is from the south, and that gave us the cross-border thing completely. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's really, really great. Thanks, Morris. Really interesting. And I suppose Colette, the researcher, was based in Galway, and she herself made herself flexible by going to Strabane and Laban, where it was cross-border rather than having to get the PPI contributors to travel. So that's a nice thing to see. And I echo what you're saying in terms of the panel and the partnership. So a real theme coming out today is equal and active partnership between all of our PPI initiatives. So thanks very much to all of you in the My Comrade study for joining us today. That was absolutely excellent. So we're going to go into our final speaker and our final presentation today. So I'm delighted to introduce Professor Sean Dineen. So Sean is a consultant endocrinologist here in Galway, and he is the national lead for the PPI Ignite Network, the newly established PPI Ignite Network. Sean previously was the lead of the PPI Ignite program at NUI Galway, and he is here today to speak to us about Towards Excellence in Research in Ireland, the PPI Ignite Network. So he'll be giving us an overview of the PPI Ignite Network and maybe what we can expect to see over the next 5 years.
Good afternoon. My name is Sean Dineen, and I'm going to present an update on an exciting development that has just started, the PPI Ignite Network. And I'm going to take you through, in the next 15 minutes or so, some of the exciting developments that are happening and that you can hopefully participate in over the next few years. The title slide refers to PPI not being an end in itself, but rather a means to an end, with the idea being that PPI contributes to excellence in research. I'm going to introduce you to some of the people and some of the organizations involved in the PPI Ignite network, describe our ambition and our vision for the work that we're going to do, take you through some of that work, and then finish up with opportunities for you to get involved in this work. So I think it's appropriate to start by acknowledging the contribution of the HRB. The network that I will be telling you about is funded jointly by the Health Research Board, the Irish Research Council, and the local higher education institutions that are hosting the network sites. But really, the HRB has led the way in this area in Ireland, and taken from their recently published strategy, they have the ambition to place the voice of the public, patients and carers at the core of everything they do. And the PPI Ignite network will, I think, be an important part of the infrastructure for health and social care research in Ireland in the next few years. So the network sites are described on this slide. The 5 original Ignite sites that many of you will be familiar with, because we have been working together for the past 3 years, and those 5 sites have now been joined by UCC and RCSI to form the 7 lead sites in the network, in the new PPI Ignite network. These are the site leads, and they come from different backgrounds with nursing, speech and language, medical device technology, genetics, genomics, epidemiology, sociology. And so this diversity, we hope, will lead to innovation in our approaches to delivering public and patient involvement in Ireland. As well as the lead sites, each of the universities also has a network of local partners. In this case, we're illustrating the UCC partners, but all of the local sites have, all of the lead sites have local partners, a total of 53 different partners working with the university locally to build capacity for high quality PPI in their own communities. A new development with the network is the introduction of 10 national partners, and we're very excited about this and the opportunity to work with organizations like Health Research Charities Ireland and IPOSI, who have really been part of the work that we've been doing during the Ignite phase. Also coming on board to universities, Queen's, Belfast and Maynooth, organizations involved in delivering health and social care like HSE, Research and Development Office, and TUSLA, organizations involved in influencing policy in the higher education sector like Campus Engage and the Irish Universities Association. 2 successful existing networks in Ireland, Sphere, focused on population health services, research and education, and the Trials Methodology Research Network. And then 1 international partner, the International Collaboration for Participatory Health Research. So together with the lead sites, these national partners will work with us to really build on the success of the Ignite phase of our work and try and take it to the next level, influencing policy and practice around PPI nationally. we have a yet to be established public advisory panel that we envisage will be a very important part of the network and its functioning, an important part of the network governance. I'm using an image from our local PPI Ignite at NUI Galway Public Advisory Panel, which I think has been a big part of the success of our own efforts in NUI Galway. And we hope to learn from this and form a national public advisory panel. So taking all of these elements then, we believe that the network has the potential and will become, for Ireland to become a world leader in PPI by promoting excellence and innovation and harnessing the talent among our national partners, local partners, and the ambition of our funders and higher education institutions to achieve this culture change. So our PPI journey during the Ignite phase, we haven't finished the local efforts to build capacity and advocate for high quality PPI. That will continue, but there will be an expansion in terms of the new universities joining us, the national partners, and we hope further expansion as the network progresses. And then this innovation ambition as well, to think outside of the box and try to imagine new ways of promoting and delivering PPI in our research efforts. So the work packages that we have undertaken, the programs of work, if you will, are described in this slide, and I'm going to take you through them briefly in the next few slides. So work package 1 looks at building national PPI capacity, and this will be delivered by jointly by DCU, Veronica Lambert and Lucy Whiston, and NUI Galway, Ruth McMenamin, and one of our national partners, HRCI, represented here by Avril Kennan, the CEO. So the aim of work package 1 is to just build on the work of the Ignite phase and increase the capacity for PPI through training and education for researchers as well as patient organizations and members of the public, creating these participatory spaces for co-learning and tapping into the different perspectives of public patients and researchers working in collaboration. So an image from, I guess, from work package 1, the HRCI is an umbrella organization for many charities. IPOSI likewise brings together a lot of different patient-facing organizations, and I think these two partners in particular are really going to help us to tap into and hopefully build on what is an appetite and ambition for PPI in many parts of the health and social care system. Work package 2 then is going to be co-led by UCC and UL. John Salzburg and Patricia Carney will be the leads. And the goal of work package 2 is to focus on the next generation of researchers and try to embed PPI and good attitudes towards PPI in their future work. So I like the phrase normalizing PPI into undergraduate and postgraduate teaching and learning, so that it's not looked on as something additional, but rather something that is part of how they view research endeavors. And so developing principles and resources to incorporate PPI into teaching and learning, developing shared learning outcomes across the network, and developing and delivering new modules at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, building on existing initiatives. And there's also an opportunity to establish awards for excellence in PPI. Work package 3 involves embedding PPI nationally and locally through interrogating and influencing institutional policies and procedures. This work package will be led by Thilo Kroll from UCD and Giampiero Cavalieri from RCSI. The 3 main focus areas will be looking at institutional policies and procedures, interacting with and influencing research ethics committees in terms of how they view PPI, and then looking at PPI in national policy. Work package 4 is led by Trinity with input from the National Programme Office, Mary McCarran, Sarah Bowman and Michael Foley will be leading this work package, looking at promoting excellence through improving the quality of the network's PPI activities, developing a culture of impact assessment as a way of improving the PPI offering, and then creating this shared learning space among network partners. So some of the questions that that work package 4 and the Trinity team will be addressing are outlined here. How can we build a shared definition of what high quality PPI means? What are the issues that the PPI network can tackle together? And developing an impact framework is also part of the work package. So and finally then work package 5, the National Programme Office, myself and Edel Murphy, co-leading with national partners including Maynooth University around expansion and incorporating new members to the network, and TMRN, the Trials Methodology Research Network. So the work of the National Programme Office, or work package 5, will involve an online hub, which I'll tell you a little bit more about on the next slide. I've mentioned the public advisory panel already, the process for network membership important for the new technical universities and IoTs. Embedding EDI at the core of all network activities is a condition of our award and an important aspect of our work that will be a focus early on in the network. And then supporting funding calls to look at methodology around PPI, measuring the impact of the network as opposed to the impact of PPI itself, and maintaining good governance for the network. And finally, outreach to international partners will be coordinated through the National Programme Office, but will happen across all of the lead sites. The online hub will be an important part of our sharing of resources and maintaining a calendar of PPI events, which have started already. As some of you are aware, DCU and the National Programme Office are in the process of delivering a very successful webinar series around PPI in children and young people. The PPI Opportunities Database, where researchers can engage with public and patients interested in participating, and likewise public and patients who have ideas and want to participate in research can get connected up with researchers. And then finally, sharing of case studies. The network governance, I'm not going to go through in any great detail. It's still bedding in. Our PPI Ignite Network Steering Group has had its first meeting since our initiation in March. And we have already had some workshops with our partners to share our experiences and get a better feel for how we're going to work together. So finally, if you're interested in getting involved, I would encourage you to avail of the opportunities locally. Each of the local universities has a PPI Ignite network office with its own program manager. You can follow the network on Twitter, either through the National Programme Office or the individual university sites, or you can contact the National Programme Office Programme Manager, Edel Murphy. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Sean. Really great to get an extensive overview of the PPI Ignite network and an overview of the work packages and the work that's going to be done over the next 5 years. So just while we're waiting for some questions to come into the chat box, Sean, I'd like to ask you a question that has stemmed from a discussion during our PPI panel open discussion earlier. So a big topic that came up during our panel discussion was regarding remuneration or payment of PPI contributors, and a real clear sense from that discussion it came out that, you know, it would be great to have some consistency around that in Ireland. So maybe a benchmark of what payments should be made or how payments should be made. I'm just wondering, is this a topic that the PPI Ignite network might be looking into solving or into, you know, delving into within each of the universities?
Thanks, thanks, Martha, and thanks for the opportunity to present and talk about the network. Yeah, I think money makes the world go round, and you know, there's no doubt that when a research group are serious about public and patient involvement, they include funding in their grant, and that is becoming clearer. I think it's becoming a clear metric, perhaps, on the sort of, you know, the seriousness, inverted commas, of the PPI intent, and so I think that we have, I would say, in the past we have presumed that public and patient involvement comes free gratis, and, you know, I think those days are gone. I think that the Involve efforts in the UK and the NIHR, National Institutes of Health Research efforts, you know, would have criteria for funding the contribution of PPI. I see Edel on camera. Edel is probably closer to this than any of us and might want to make a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. So I think firstly to say that I think the HRB, through their grant application calls, have really moved the payment to the top of the agenda, in that, you know, you're now asked to include it in your budget, and other calls as well. The Irish Cancer Society recently had really good guidance on how you might structure your things. So I think there's a lot happening on that front. And from my own work with researchers over the last few years, it has come as a shock initially, and then they begin to say, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. So I think it's getting into the ether. I think the big challenge is around the payment processes. And yes, the national network are going to look at that. One of the work packages around policies and procedures, that is definitely going to be an area we look at to see whether there are simpler ways in which payments can be made, in which a variety of ways, because it definitely won't be one hat fits all, but to look into it. And it's probably worth saying that this isn't just an Irish problem. This is a problem right across the globe. And I mean, in some places, for example, in Northern Ireland, you're not allowed paying PPI contributors, but elsewhere in the UK and in Canada and Australia, everybody has struggled with this whole issue. So I think what we need to do in Ireland is improve the payment processes as they are, and share that information around the country.
Brilliant. Thanks, Edel and Sean. And just adding on to what you said there, Edel, about that it may be different for everybody. It mightn't be a one type fits all. And as Robert has come in here in the chat and said, you know, a big obstacle for some patients getting involved in research is the fear they will lose any social welfare payments. So that's something that we as researchers need to be aware of when we are looking into reimbursement. So another question I have for you, Sean, would be maybe if I'm watching this today as somebody in a patient organisation or a community or a public organisation, how can I get involved with the PPI Ignite network or with the broader teams, with those within the universities? You know, it seems to be very inclusive. Is there space for everyone to get involved? And
yeah, again, I think that's a good question, and I think that's part of the challenge for the network, is to facilitate those partnerships, you know, to make it easier for those relationships, to happen. I suspect that the majority of them happen from within the university, sort of looking out. But I would hope that, if we're successful, that we can shift that dynamic. I think people in the community, people in patient organizations, and indeed just individual members of the public, have ideas and have things that are important to them. And I think, part of the challenge for us as a network is to try to, enable a two-way exchange, not just the researcher coming out, or of his or her sort of ivory tower. That's the perception, and asking for help, but actually facilitating a two-way conversation. Adele, did you want to add anything there?
Yeah, and I think it is all about a learning process. And I think the work that people like the HRCI are doing, they have a shared learning group around involvement. And IPOSI about educating the patients. Like Robert earlier on was a good example where he said 17 years ago, he didn't know, he thought he could talk directly to the Minister for Health to get a drug trial running. But through education, he now has learned the sphere. So I do think that capacity building on both sides, and even we saw it with the project we ran in NUI Galway, around working with community groups, community engaged scholars, and like the community partners, one of them said, I realised I can actually start the process rather than being recipients. So there's been a lot of work done, really good work in terms of community engaged research. And I think gradually the community partners are realising that they can move up that grey spectrum we talk about and, get the ball rolling and lead out. So I think the environment is changing, and I think both sides are beginning to understand ways of coming together. And I loved the Rotary Club. Certainly for me, that was a new one in terms of, where you might find PPI partners, but that's kind of a separate issue. Yeah.
Great, thanks very much. And we have an interesting comment in here. For most people wanting to get involved in PPI, often they don't know how to find projects relevant to them. Is there any future plans to create a one-stop shop where patients and public can get this information? So I know you mentioned in your presentation, Sean, a PPI Opportunities Hub. So I see, Adele, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I will, because this is very near and dear to my heart. And I know IPOSI have been thinking about this as well. So I agree absolutely with whoever puts that question in there. And our idea is that the online hub, which we're planning at the moment and we get up and running, that there will be an opportunity for researchers to say, I am looking for this profile of person, and then for members of the public and patient organisations to link up and say, I'm interested in getting involved. And similarly for non-academics to say, I'm interested in getting involved in cancer research, BRCA gene mutation research, and pushing it the other way. And I'm hopeful that that will really begin to bridge that gap, because there has been a gap.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thanks, Adele. So as PPI grows, perhaps we should be skilled in shredding members of a group. The strong sense of belonging can sometimes lead to folk remaining beyond the sell-by date. There's a question in from Patrick Towers, a member of a primary care PPI group here in Galway.
Yeah, I might take that. I think it's a very good point. And again, it's about respecting the contribution, and it's about recognizing that not everybody wants to continue to. I my own PPI journey as a clinician and a researcher is with our young adult panel here in Galway, and we have seen what Patrick is referring to in his comment, and I think. If the work is important, and we believe our own work obviously is important, then you keep that voice, you keep listening to that voice, but it doesn't have to be the same person or the same group of people. And I think the idea of having a panel has probably been, the biggest learning for me, but then that panel needs to refresh itself over time. And we're now exploring in our own work with our young adults as they move out of the inverted commas young adult age, having sort of a senior membership almost, people who can help advise and nurture the younger members of the group as they come through. So I think Patrick's comment or question is very is spot on, and I think it's another aspect of the challenge. You know, even when you do it well, you need to respect the fact that, you know, people need a break from it. I love Nikki's idea of BRCA holidays earlier.
Yeah, very good. So will the network have any role in facilitating research on enhancing PPI methods and impact?
I hope so. You know, it's something that I hope with our partnership with TMRN in particular, but across all of the universities, we haven't got all the answers. We haven't got it all figured out, and you know, there are still a lot of people who are not convinced that PPI, you know, has a contribution to make, and I think the challenge for us is to you know, to try and explore that. It's unlikely to be, you know, and again, I participated earlier in the international PPI around the world, and the fantastic presentation by Olinda Santon. Any of you who didn't get to hear it, I would encourage you to listen to it. But Olinda's group, who developed this cancer caring coping resource for carers of people dealing with cancer, you know, they went to the literature, they looked for the evidence and found nothing. And then, you know, through their own connections and through their own sort of ambition, you know, they established a PPI driven research effort, and it was a very powerful story. So how we convince people, to me, is the methodology piece. Edel?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Sean. But so I think it's important. The network itself isn't funded to conduct large amounts of research with a small amount of funding. But I think there are a lot of people involved in the network who will be doing research into methodologies. In fact, there's one PhD study bubbling already. So yes, there will definitely be related work going on.
That's brilliant. Thanks very much, Sean and Edel. Unless you have anything else to add, in the interest of time, we will leave it there.
Thanks, Martha.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Martha.
Morris from the My Comrade study, I see you've come in the chat and you'd like to make another point regarding the cross-border aspect of the study. Would you like to unmute yourself there, Morris? And we have a minute or two if you'd like to make that.
Yes, thank you very much. It was just when Sean mentioned the involvement of Queen's University, which was actually universities I attended. When the question was asked about the cross-border aspect of My Comrade Plus, I concentrated on the cross-border aspect of the PPI partnership. I should have also mentioned that the study is a cross-border study involving Galway University and Queen's University, and the practices that were involved in the study were from both sides of the border. So I just wanted to make people aware of that, because that is the cross-border aspect of it as well. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks, Morris. And thanks for coming in there again on that. That's really interesting and great to see the successful collaboration between the cross-border and to show us, you know, that it is possible. So it's great to see that success there within that study. Thanks very much. So now we're coming to an end of the conference. We would just like to thank every one of our presenters, all of our chairs, and everyone who has attended today. Usually at our PPI events, we learn so much from the presentations, but we also learn so much from the discussions that happen throughout the Q&A sessions, and you know that you might have over coffee and things like that. And I feel we haven't obviously achieved it. It's not possible when you're not in person, but we have mirrored it through the chat. There's been a great discussion going on all day in the chat box and during the PPI panel session today. So thanks very much, everyone. So I'm just going to give a few closing comments before we head off. So thanks very much to Carmel Gagan for opening our conference this morning, speaking about the importance of the lived experience in research and highlighting the need for equal and active partnerships. So I'd echo what Carmel said. If you're going to give me a seat at the table, please do listen to me. So thanks very much, Carmel. We were delighted to have you to open our conference today. Then we moved over to Robert Joyce, and Robert spoke of his experience as an embedded patient researcher. And Robert highlighted the language he uses there when he uses the term embedded patient researcher, highlighting that he is not a researcher in the traditional sense, although he is employed within the university. He is embedded within the middle of it all. And I think this links in nicely with the theme of today of creating the new normal in research. For this to happen, we must be open and flexible. We then had Professor Martin O'Halloran and Professor Aoife Lowry speaking about innovative ways to embed PPI in medical device development. Here we highlighted the right of the public and patients to be included in research that will directly impact them. So in terms of a human rights perspective, the right of people to be included in research. It's really exciting to see that presentation from Martin and Aoife to see where things are going to go in the next 5 years in terms of embedding PPI within the medical device development. We then went into our parallel sessions. First, we had our PPI panel. So we're delighted to have Avril Daly, Precious Dubain, Emily Atkinson, Jack Gaffey and Teresa Tierney join us, and have Wendy Costello and Dr. Ruth McMenamin chair that session. We had a really vibrant and interesting and engaging discussion during that session, where the attendees also had a lot to offer. So it was really interesting to hear during that discussion the different perspectives from each of the panel members and attendees within the chat. In another parallel room, chaired by Dr. Una Mead, the theme was Including the Excluded. So we had Joanna O'Shea from Maynooth University speaking about her learning from young adults in prison. We also had Ciara Shiggins and Ian Duffy in that parallel, speaking about they co-produced an aphasia accessible survey. So I'd just like to note that Ciara Shiggins is in Melbourne and she is still on this Zoom this evening. And I checked about an hour ago and it was 10 p.m. in Melbourne. So I'd say it must be 11 now. So thanks very much, Ciara, for joining us. We were delighted to invite you back to Ireland, albeit virtually. So then we had Andrew in our third parallel session. Andrew chaired this session, Professor Andrew Murphy, and lucky him, he got to take a trip around the world. The theme here was PPI around the world, and we were very fortunate enough to listen about PPI initiatives taking place in Copenhagen and Hanoi with Nana, Carl and Olinda. Then we had Nikki Warner, a PhD student within NUI Galway, who is an exemplar example of how PPI can be embedded within any PhD, and also such a great example of creative ways to include PPI. We then had the My Comrade Plus study, another winner of the PPI Awards in Excellence in NUI Galway, speaking about their perspectives of being involved within this cross-border trial, and speaking of how they have set up their PPI group through COVID. They have never met face-to-face, but they're still managing to review information leaflets, analyse data, and code things. So that's absolutely amazing. And then we just closed with Professor Sean Deneen and Edel Murphy speaking about the PPI Ignite network. So it was great to get a perspective of the newly established PPI Ignite network and hear the future plans of what's to come in the PPI realm in Ireland and internationally. So we're going to leave it there, and we'd like to thank very much everyone, all our presenters and our chairs for joining us. I'm just going to share a photo of our organising committee because I would like to give them a massive thank you. So Wendy Costello, Breda Kelleher, Ruth McMenamin, Dennis Mokler, Edel Murphy, Patrick Murphy, Teresa Tierney and Patrick Towers, who without this conference wouldn't have been possible. Thanks very much to each and every one of you for your involvement in all of the organising of the conference. So thanks very much, everyone. We will hopefully see you all again soon.